The night the truth was born, the world was silent, and one woman's life changed forever. In a quiet Tennessee town, a young farm girl entered a hospital seeking hope and left carrying a secret that would shake everything she knew. What began as a tragedy of science soon became a battle for dignity, justice, and love. A love that defied shame, power, and time itself. What would you do if your pain made headlines? And the man the world called the Dubai Maharaja was the only one who stood by your side. Stay with us, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Let's reach our first 1,000 subscribers together and keep bringing these unforgettable love stories to life. The morning began the way Ella Whitaker's mornings always began, with the soft creak of the porch step under her boot and the cold air slipping into her lungs like a quiet reminder that life didn't pause for anyone. The sky above the fields was pale and wide, the kind of Tennessee blue that made you feel small in the best way. The world smelled like damp earth, hay, and the faint sweetness of feed corn. And for a moment, Ella could pretend she was still the same girl she'd been before the accident, before the hospital, before the paperwork that had turned her name into a file number. She fed the chickens with practiced hands, her fingers steady, even when her wrist still ached. The injury from the farm mishap had healed enough that she could move, work, smile at her mother from across the yard without wincing every time she lifted something. But the pain hadn't entirely left. It lingered like a memory the body refused to forget. Her mother's voice floated from inside the house, warm and firm. "Ella, honey, don't overdo it." "Dee, I'm not," Ella called back, though she slowed anyway, because Marlene Whitaker had the kind of worry that made even the strongest people feel cared for and scolded at the same time. Ella pushed a strand of light brown hair back into her ponytail and rubbed the small silver cross at her neck. She did it without thinking, the way some people tapped a wedding ring. It grounded her. It reminded her who she was. Except lately, she wasn't sure she recognized herself. By mid-morning, the nausea came again. It hit without drama, no warning that gave her time to excuse herself politely. 1 second, she was rinsing her hands at the outdoor spigot, and the next, her stomach rolled so hard she had to brace herself against the sink. The world narrowed to the sound of running water and the quickening of her own breath. She swallowed hard, blinking against the sting behind her eyes. "Not now," she whispered, as if her body might listen. But it didn't. The nausea faded into a heavy, lingering dizziness, and for the first time that week, fear slid under her skin in a way she couldn't brush off as stress. She'd tried. She'd told herself it was the pain medication, the after-effects of the injury, the worry of medical bills, the way her father's jaw had been clenched for days because he hated that the hospital had become part of their life. Yet the symptoms kept returning like a knock on a door she didn't want to open. Inside, Marlene looked up from the kitchen table, where a stack of mail and folded laundry competed for space. Her eyes sharpened the second she saw Ella's face. "You're pale." "I'm fine," Ella said automatically. Marlene stood anyway, wiping her hands on a dish towel. "Sit down." Ella obeyed because there was no arguing with her mother when she used that tone. The kitchen smelled like coffee and warm bread, comforting and normal, and Ella hated that her stomach turned even at the smell of the coffee pot. Marlene's fingers pressed gently to Ella's forehead. "No fever. I think it's just my stomach." Ella kept her voice light, but it came out thin. Marlene studied her with the quiet intensity only a mother could wield. "This has been going on for days." Ella looked down at the table, at the faint scratches in the wood that had been there since she was a child. "It'll pass." "It's not passing," Marlene said. "And you're not a machine, sweetheart." From the doorway, Hank Whitaker appeared, tall and broad-shouldered, the kind of man built by sun and work. His work boots were dusty, his flannel sleeves rolled up, his expression already hard before he even spoke. "What's wrong now?" Ella flinched at the edge in his voice, and she hated herself for it. He wasn't angry at her. Not really. He was angry at everything that had taken her out of the safe orbit of their farm. Marlene answered before Ella could. She's been nauseated, dizzy. Hank's gaze snapped to Ella, and something in it softened, just barely. Why didn't you tell us? Ella forced a small smile. Because I didn't want you to worry. Hank exhaled sharply, a sound that carried more helplessness than anger. Too late for that. Marlene set a glass of water in front of Ella. You're going to the clinic. Ella's hands tightened around the glass. Mom. No, Marlene said. And it wasn't cruel. It was love with a backbone. We already did wait and see. Now we do make sure. Hank's jaw flexed. If this is from those meds they gave you, I swear, it's probably nothing, Ella insisted, though even she didn't believe it anymore. Marlene leaned closer, voice low and soothing. If it's nothing, we'll come home. If it's something, we'll be glad we didn't ignore it. Ella nodded because she didn't know what else to do. Her fingers drifted to the cross again, rubbing the cool metal until her pulse calmed. The clinic in town was small, practical, and far less intimidating than the hospital in Nashville. The waiting room smelled like disinfectant and hand sanitizer, and a muted television played a morning talk show no one was watching. Ella sat between her parents, feeling like a child, despite being a grown woman. Marlene's hand covered hers. Hank's knee bounced with contained tension. When the nurse called her name, Ella stood too quickly, and the room tilted. Marlene caught her elbow immediately. I'm fine, Ella whispered. Marlene squeezed once, as if to say, I know you're not. The exam room was bright with fluorescent light. The nurse was kind, mid-30s maybe, with a practiced smile and gentle eyes. So, Ella, she said, glancing at the chart, you've been dealing with nausea and dizziness? Yes. Ella tried to keep her voice steady. Any changes in diet? Stress? Sleep? Ella hesitated. Stress, yes. Sleep, not much. But she didn't say it out loud because stress had become her new normal, and she didn't want it used as an excuse to dismiss her. The nurse took her vitals, asked her questions, wrote things down. Then she paused, pen hovering, and asked calmly, When was your last menstrual cycle? Ella blinked. I don't know exactly. Her cheeks warmed. It's been irregular since the injury. I thought it was just my body recovering. The nurse nodded in a way that didn't judge, only noted. We can do a pregnancy test as part of the standard panel. Ella's heart gave a strange, startled jump. Pregnancy. It was absurd. It didn't belong in her life. Pregnancy belonged to someone else's story, someone else's choices, not hers. Marlene's hand tightened around Ella's. Hank's head snapped up. That's not possible, he said too sharply, too fast. Ella felt her throat close. She couldn't make herself breathe for a second. The nurse looked between them, unruffled. We run it just to rule things out, she said gently. It's routine. Ella found her voice in a whisper. I can't be. Marlene's expression shifted, not to suspicion, but to worry for Ella's panic. Honey. Ella couldn't say the word virgin. It stuck in her chest like a confession, even though she hadn't done anything wrong. She swallowed, eyes stinging. I haven't. The nurse's gaze softened with sudden understanding. Okay, she said quietly, as if she'd stepped into sacred ground. We'll still test. Sometimes symptoms mimic other things, and we want answers. Ella nodded because nodding was easier than falling apart. They took a urine sample. They left her alone for a few minutes that felt like an hour. Ella stared at the beige wall, at a poster about seasonal flu vaccines, at the sink that looked too clean to be real. Hank paced. Marlene prayed under her breath, barely audible. Ella listened to her mother's whisper like it was a rope being thrown to her in deep water. When the nurse returned, her smile was gone. She stood in the doorway, holding a small printout. She didn't speak immediately, and in that pause, Ella felt something inside her snap. The nurse cleared her throat. Ella, the test is positive. Ella didn't understand the words at first. Positive could mean anything. Positive could mean good news. Positive could mean nothing. Then the meaning slammed into her like a door closing. No, Ella breathed. Marlene made a sound like pain. Hank froze, his face draining of color. The nurse spoke quickly, steadying. "We're going to repeat it to confirm. False positives are rare, but we don't assume anything on one test. We'll do a blood test and confirm levels." Ella shook her head, a small, desperate motion. "That's not possible," she said again, and this time she meant it with her whole soul. "It can't be." Marlene's arm wrapped around her shoulders. "Sweetheart, look at me. We're going to figure it out." Hank's voice was low, furious, trembling. "You telling me my daughter is pregnant and you don't know how?" The nurse held his gaze calmly. "I'm telling you we have a positive test. We're confirming with blood work, and then we talk about how to proceed medically." Ella couldn't hear anything after that. The room seemed too bright, too loud, too wrong. Her stomach twisted again, and she pressed her hand to her mouth, fighting the urge to run. They drew blood. They asked her to wait. Wait. Ella sat with her hands clenched in her lap, knuckles pale, while her parents sat on either side like they could physically keep the world from touching her. Marlene kept whispering, "We're here," like a spell. Hank stared at the floor with a storm brewing behind his eyes. The blood test came back faster than Ella expected. The nurse returned with the doctor, and the doctor's face was careful, the way faces are when they're carrying something heavy. "Ella," the doctor said gently, "the blood work confirms it. You are pregnant." Ella's vision blurred. She gripped the edge of the chair because she thought she might float away. "I don't understand," she whispered. I don't understand." The doctor's expression tightened, not with judgment, but with concern. "Based on your hormone levels, you're in the early stages. We'd estimate several weeks." Marlene looked like she might cry, but she didn't. She simply held Ella tighter. Hank's voice came out raw. "This is wrong. There's no way." Ella couldn't speak. The shame came first, like a reflex she hated, even though she hadn't earned it. Shame for what people would say. Shame for what her church friends would think. Shame for the look she imagined on Ivy Caldwell's face if this ever got out. Then came fear, because if she hadn't been with anyone, and she knew she hadn't, then what did this mean? The doctor looked at Ella, and his voice lowered. "I'm going to ask you something, and I need you to understand this is medical, not moral. Have you ever been sexually active?" Ella's face burned. She shook her head, tears spilling before she could stop them. "No," she whispered. "I swear, no." Marlene's voice cut in, steel wrapped in softness. "She's telling you the truth." Hank stood up so abruptly his chair scraped the floor. "She's not lying." The doctor nodded slowly, as if absorbing the gravity. "All right," he said. He didn't dismiss her. He didn't smirk. He didn't look skeptical. He looked troubled. "Then we need to consider other factors. Sometimes a patient's recollection of procedures can be incomplete if sedation was involved, or if there were complications." Ella's head snapped up. Sedation? The word pulled her straight back to the hospital after her injury. The bright ceiling, the nurses moving around her, the moment she'd felt the edge of sleep tug her under. She remembered signing papers. She remembered being told it was standard, that they needed imaging, that they'd give her something to relax her. She remembered waking up groggy, confused, with a dull ache, and a nurse telling her everything went fine. She remembered trusting them. The doctor continued carefully. "I want you to follow up with the hospital where you received treatment after the accident. We need to obtain your records. We also need to ensure your care is appropriate going forward." Hank's hands curled into fists. "You're saying they did something to my daughter?" The doctor lifted both hands slightly, cautious. "I'm saying we need to understand what happened, and we need those records." Ella felt cold all over. Her cross felt heavy against her skin. The ride back from the clinic was quiet. Hank drove, as if the road had personally offended him. Marlene sat in the front, one hand gripping the dashboard, the other holding Ella's hand across the seat. Ella stared out the window at the winter-bare trees and the fields passing by, feeling like she was watching someone else's life. At home, Marlene guided her into the kitchen, sat her down, made her sip ginger tea. Hank moved like a caged animal, pacing, muttering under his breath. Ella could hear words like lawsuit and criminal, and I'll burn that place down. Ella wanted to scream that she didn't want burning. She wanted her life back, but her throat wouldn't form the sound. That afternoon, Marlene called the hospital network. Ella listened from the kitchen table, hands wrapped around the warm mug, while her mother's voice stayed polite, even as anger sharpened every syllable. "I need my daughter's records," Marlene said, "all of them. From the day she was admitted to the follow-up visit, today." A pause, then Marlene's posture stiffened. "No, I won't submit a request and wait. This is urgent." Another pause. Marlene's jaw tightened. Yes, I understand policies. I also understand my daughter is pregnant and she has not been sexually active." Ella's stomach dropped. She wanted to snatch the phone and swallow those words back into silence, but it was too late. The world now had the fact, even if the world was just one person on the other end of a phone line. Marlene's tone became colder. "We're coming in person." She hung up and exhaled as if she'd been holding her breath for an hour. Hank slammed his palm against the counter so hard the mug rattled. "They're hiding something." Marlene looked at Ella, eyes shining. "We are not going to let anyone shame you, Ella. Not this town, not that hospital, nobody." Ella tried to speak, but her voice came out broken. "People are going to think—" "I don't care what people think," Hank growled, and the rawness in his voice made Ella's eyes fill again. "I care what happened to my daughter." The word daughter landed like protection, like a wall between her and the world. Still, that night, when Ella lay in bed, the fear returned with a different face. The town. The way eyes followed you at the grocery store. The way whispers could crawl under doors. The way one rumor could become a truth if repeated enough. Ella imagined Ivy Caldwell's expression, the polished smile that could cut without leaving a mark. Ella imagined the sympathetic head tilt, the sweet voice saying, "Bless her heart," like pity was a weapon. Ella pressed her hand to her stomach, barely there, barely real, and yet it already felt like a new gravity inside her. "I didn't choose this," she whispered into the dark. "I didn't." She didn't know who she was speaking to. God maybe, the baby, herself. The next morning, they drove to the hospital network office outside Nashville. The building was too sleek, too modern, too confident. Glass and steel, bright lobby, neutral art. A place built to look trustworthy. Ella walked in wearing her modest blouse and borrowed tailored pants, her hair pulled neatly back, her cross visible against her collarbone like armor. She wished she could disappear. She wished she could become a shadow behind her parents. But she forced her spine straight because she could feel Hank and Marlene's protective presence like a steady heat behind her. At the front desk, a woman with perfect makeup smiled. "How can I help you?" Marlene's voice was controlled. "We need Ella Whitaker's records from her visit after the farm accident." The receptionist's smile faltered for half a second. "I can give you the forms to request." "We already requested," Hank cut in, his voice sharp enough to slice glass. "And we're not leaving without them." A supervisor appeared, then another. Ella watched them trade glances that weren't meant for her to see. It made her skin crawl. They ushered the Whitakers into a small conference room. The air smelled like recycled ventilation and lemon-scented cleaner. A man in a grey suit arrived with a folder and a practiced expression. "Mrs. Whitaker," he said, and he smiled like this was customer service, not a family in crisis. "We understand you have concerns." Ella's hands trembled under the table. She tucked them into her lap so no one would see. Marlene leaned forward. "My daughter is pregnant. She has not been sexually active. Her doctor instructed us to obtain her full records." The man's smile tightened. "We can provide relevant documentation after review." Hank's chair scraped the floor as he stood. "After review?" His voice rose, and Ella flinched. "You don't review my daughter's life. You hand over what you did to her." The man's eyes flicked to Ella, then away, as if she were a complication instead of a person. "Sir, please lower your voice." Ella felt something inside her ignite, small but sharp. She lifted her chin. "I want my records," she said, and her voice surprised even her. It wasn't loud. It was steady. "All of them." The man paused, as if recalculating. He opened the folder and slid a stack of papers across the table. Ella stared at the dense text, the codes, the dates. It looked like a foreign language. She flipped through, searching for something that felt familiar. Then she saw it. A code that didn't make sense to her. A note about a procedure she didn't remember. A timestamp that placed her in a department she'd never knowingly entered. Her breath caught. "What is this?" she asked, pointing. The man's eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly. "Standard documentation." "No," Ella whispered, the word trembling. This wasn't standard. Hank leaned over her shoulder, scanning. Marlene's face turned pale. Ella's vision tunneled. The room felt too small, too tight. Her pulse thundered in her ears. And then, on the glossy side table beneath a framed brochure about patient care, she saw a magazine. A business magazine with a man on the cover. He stood in a black suit, expression composed, a city skyline behind him, wealth and power in every line of his posture. His hair was dark, his eyes pale and unreadable, his jaw strong. The headline praised his philanthropy, his discipline, his global lifestyle. The caption beneath the photo used the nickname she'd heard people say with fascination on television. The Dubai Maharaja, Mason Cade. Ella stared at the face, and something icy slid through her veins, though she couldn't have explained why. It wasn't attraction, not yet. It was the eerie sense of a door opening somewhere far away, a draft entering her life. The man in the grey suit cleared his throat. "If you have concerns about the documentation, you can file a formal complaint." Hank's voice was a low growl. "We're beyond complaints." Marlene's hand covered Ella's again, squeezing hard. "We need answers, and we need them now." Ella's throat tightened until it hurt. She looked down at her papers again, at the confusing codes, at the cold language describing her body like equipment. Her mother's voice trembled, but it didn't break. "What happened to my daughter?" The man hesitated, and that hesitation was the loudest sound Ella had ever heard. Then he said carefully, "There may be additional verification required." Ella's fingers tightened around the edge of the paper. Verification of what? He swallowed. Of how this occurred. Hank slammed his fist onto the table, and the papers jumped. "We already told you how it didn't occur." The man's smile disappeared entirely. He reached into the folder again and pulled out another page, keeping it face down for a moment, as if he was bracing for impact. Ella's heart began to pound so hard she could feel it in her fingertips. The man slid the paper across the table and flipped it over. At the top was a bold header. Below it, a set of clinical results. Ella's eyes dropped to a line of text that made the room tilt. Paternity trace. Result. Positive match. Ella couldn't breathe. The man's voice came from very far away. The identification came back. "There is a confirmed biological link." Marlene made a strangled sound. Hank went completely still. Ella stared at the name printed on the page, her vision blurring until the letters swam. Mason Cade, the Dubai Maharaja. And in the silence that followed, Ella felt her entire world begin to split open, right down the center, as if fate itself had taken a sharp blade to the life she thought was safe. Ella Whitaker did not remember standing up. One moment she was staring at the paper on the conference room table, her eyes trapped on those two words that looked like they belonged to a stranger's life. The next, she was on her feet with the chair scraping behind her, her palms flat against the edge of the table, as if the wood were the only thing keeping her from falling through the floor. Mason Cade. The name sat there in cold ink, sharp and final, as if a printer could rewrite fate with one click. "No," Ella whispered. The word came out like breath over glass. That's not possible." The man in the grey suit, his tie too perfect, his expression too controlled, shifted uncomfortably. He wasn't used to pain. He couldn't smooth over with policy language. "Miss Whitaker," he began, voice carefully neutral, "the test indicates a biological link. We are still reviewing. My daughter has never—" Marlene's voice broke, but it didn't crumble. It was the sound of a mother trying to hold a roof up with her bare hands. "She has never been with anyone." Hank's face had gone frighteningly still, the kind of stillness that came right before a storm. "Say it again," he demanded, low and lethal. "Say that name again and tell me you're sure." The man's lips tightened. "Sir, I understand this is distressing." "Distressing?" Hank lunged a step forward, and Ella felt her mother's hand clamp around her wrist, not to restrain her, but to keep her tethered to reality. "You put my daughter's life in a file, and you call it distressing?" The air in the room felt thinner, like it was being pulled away through the vents. Ella's heartbeat was a drum in her ears, loud enough that she couldn't tell if the silence was real or just inside her head. She looked down again, forcing herself to read what she already knew she'd read. The header, the clinical phrasing, the confirmation line that made her stomach twist. Her fingers shook, and in that trembling, she felt something else under the fear, a sharp, humiliated anger. Not at the name itself, she didn't know the man, not really, but at the reality that her body had become a battleground and the world was about to decide she was guilty of something she didn't even understand. Marlene moved closer to her. "Ella, honey, look at me." Her mother's face was pale, but her eyes were fierce. You breathe right now." Ella tried. The air tasted like lemon cleaner and panic. "I don't know him," Ella said, and it came out louder than she meant. The words shook with the desperate need to be believed. "I have never met him. I have never—" She stopped because her throat closed around the rest of the sentence, because she could not keep saying it like a confession. The man in the suit slid a second document forward, as if more paper could make this better. "We can arrange further verification," he offered. "Independent testing, if you'd like. This could be a clerical issue, a mislabeled sample, a what?" Hank snapped. "A clerical issue that makes my daughter pregnant." The man's eyes flicked to the door. Ella saw it. That quick, nervous glance, the way his professional mask slipped for half a second. He was afraid, not of Hank, not of a lawsuit, of something else, of a truth sitting behind the walls of the building. Ella's lips parted. Her voice was quiet, but it cut. "You knew." The man blinked. "Excuse me?" "You knew something was wrong," Ella said, and she hated that her voice was trembling because she wanted it to be steady, strong. "The moment my mother said I wasn't sexually active, you looked like you were trying to decide what to say." Marlene's grip tightened. Hank's eyes narrowed like he was seeing the man clearly for the first time. The man forced a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Miss Whitaker, I assure you, we take patient concerns seriously. The hospital system will conduct a full internal—" "No," Hank's voice dropped heavy as stone. "We want our records. We want the names of everyone who touched her file. We want everything." The man's smile vanished. "That isn't possible without—" "Without what?" Marlene asked, and there was something quietly terrifying in the way she said it. "Without your permission to protect yourselves?" The man inhaled, then exhaled slowly. "You may file a formal request for audit logs." "Today," Hank growled. The man's gaze flicked again, and Ella knew in her bones that if they walked out with only promises, the truth would be buried under paperwork until it was impossible to dig out. Her stomach rolled. Her skin felt too tight. She reached for her cross, pressing it between her fingers until the metal bit into her skin. The conference room door opened. A woman in an expensive blouse and a hospital badge stepped inside, her hair smooth, her posture too polished. She looked at the Whitakers as if they were a problem that had wandered in from the wrong side of town. "Mr. Whitaker," she said, "I'm going to ask you to lower your voice." Hank turned toward her like a switch had flipped. "I'll lower my voice when someone explains how my daughter ended up pregnant by a man she's never met." The woman's expression tightened. "We are handling this." Ella's eyes stung. She couldn't take the tone. The way the woman spoke as if Ella's life were an inconvenience. "No, you're not," Ella said, and the room went still. The woman's gaze snapped to her. "Miss Whitaker, you're not handling anything," Ella said, each word fragile but firm. "You're trying to make it quiet. You're trying to make me go away." Marlene's hand moved to Ella's back, a silent support. Hank stood beside her like a wall. The grey-suited man cleared his throat. "We will follow procedure." Ella's laugh came out small and broken, and she hated it because it sounded like despair. "Procedure is what brought me here." She didn't wait for permission. She gathered the papers, her papers, into a trembling stack and stood. Her knees wobbled, but she didn't sit back down. "We're leaving," Marlene said. Hank didn't argue. He simply looked at the grey-suited man with a promise in his eyes. "You'll hear from our lawyer." The woman with the badge stepped forward. "Please don't." Hank's voice was low. "Don't what? Expose you?" The lobby outside the conference room felt too bright, too normal. People walked by holding coffee cups. Someone laughed softly near the elevators. A receptionist smiled at a child. Ella's hands were shaking so hard the papers rustled like dry leaves. Outside, the air hit her face cold and sharp. For a moment, she thought she might throw up. Marlene guided her toward the car, her arm around Ella's shoulders, her body shielding her like it always had. Hank slammed the driver's side door shut with a force that made the entire car rock. They drove in silence for a few minutes, the highway stretching ahead like a ribbon through the winter fields. Ella stared out the window, watching the trees blur. She felt detached from her own body, as if the person in the passenger seat was a stranger wearing her face. Marlene finally spoke, voice trembling but steady. "We're going to get answers." Ella's lips parted. The truth that had been choking her for hours finally rose. "What if people think I'm lying?" Marlene's eyes flashed toward her. "Then people will be wrong." Hank's knuckles were white around the steering wheel. "They'll think whatever they want," he said roughly. "But they're not touching you, not while I'm breathing." Ella pressed her forehead to the cold window. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe that love could keep the world out. But she knew how small towns worked, how whispers traveled faster than truth. It started that afternoon. Ella didn't even see the first post. Marlene did, when she picked up her phone and gasped softly as she sat at the kitchen table. Hank was in the yard, pacing like he might tear the fence posts out with his hands. Marlene looked at Ella, eyes glossy. Someone knows." Ella's stomach sank. "How?" Marlene turned the phone toward her. A local gossip page. A blurry photo of the Whitaker truck outside the hospital office. A caption that made Ella's skin go cold. "Farm girl in trouble? Sources say a good girl isn't so good after all." Ella couldn't breathe. More comments loaded beneath it, each one a small knife. People she didn't recognize, people she did. A few names that belonged to women who had smiled at her in church, who had hugged her during potlucks. Always knew she was hiding something. Poor parents. Imagine the shame. Bet she's trying to get money. Who even is the father? Probably made up. Ella's vision blurred. She handed the phone back like it burned. Marlene's voice shook with fury. "This is evil!" Hank stormed inside when he heard the tremor in his wife's voice. He snatched the phone, read one line, and his face darkened so fast Ella felt fear flash through her. "I'll go to every one of their houses," Hank growled. Marlene grabbed his arm. "No, Hank, not like that." Hank's chest rose and fell. "They're talking about our daughter like she's trash." Ella pressed her hand to her stomach, barely there, barely real, and yet it already felt like a weight that made her fragile. I can't do this." Marlene pulled her into her arms. "You can," she murmured fiercely. "You can, because you have no other choice. And you are not alone." But the internet wasn't the only place the whispers lived. They lived in the silence that followed when Ella walked into the small grocery store with her mother the next day. The cashier, who usually greeted her with a bright smile, looked down at the register instead. A woman in the aisle paused mid-reach, eyes flicking over Ella's belly like she could already see what no one else could. Ella's cheeks burned. She kept her head down, clutching the cart handle so hard her fingers hurt. In the parking lot, she heard it. A laugh, a whisper, a name she recognized. Ivy, someone murmured, not realizing Ella was close enough to hear. Did you see the post? Ella froze. Her breath caught. Ivy Caldwell stood by her SUV like she owned the world, her blonde hair perfect, her nails gleaming, her smile polished. When her gaze landed on Ella, her expression softened into a mask of pity so sweet it made Ella's stomach turn. "Oh, Ella," Ivy said, voice dripping with false concern. "Honey, I heard you've been having troubles." Ella's throat tightened. Marlene's hand gripped Ella's elbow. "I don't know what you heard," Marlene said, voice calm and sharp. Ivy's eyes widened as if she were wounded. "I'm just worried," she insisted. "We're all worried. You know how people talk." I said, "Let's pray for her." Ella felt the insult underneath the words, "Let's pray for her," as if Ella were already ruined. Ella forced her voice out, "Please don't talk about me." Ivy's smile sharpened. "Of course, sweetheart, but you know, silence only makes rumors worse." Marlene stepped forward, her eyes hard. "Then maybe you should stop feeding them." Ivy blinked, offended. "I would never—" But Ella saw the flicker, the satisfaction behind Ivy's eyes. Ivy liked being the one who knew things, the one who controlled the narrative in town with a sweet voice and a careful smile. Ella's stomach rolled. She turned away quickly, and Marlene guided her to the truck. On the drive home, Ella stared at her hands in her lap. "I feel dirty," she whispered. Marlene's head snapped toward her. "Don't you say that." Ella's voice trembled. "That's what they think. That's what they want you to think," Marlene corrected, fierce and tender. "They want to make you small because it makes them feel big." Hank met them at the farm, with his phone in his hand, face pale with rage. "It's everywhere," he said. "Not just town pages. Bigger accounts are picking it up." Ella's stomach dropped again. "What do you mean, bigger?" Hank held up the screen, a headline from an entertainment blog, flashy and cruel. "Dubai Maharaja Scandal. Billionaire Mason Cade linked to mystery pregnancy in Tennessee." Ella's world tilted. Mason Cade wasn't just a name on a paper anymore. He was a storm, a machine made of money and cameras and power, and now he was attached to her. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. Ella stared at it, heart racing. She didn't want to answer. She wanted to throw the phone into the sink and pretend none of this existed, but she answered because fear had already taken so much, and she refused to let it take her voice too. "Hello?" she said, barely audible. A man's voice came through, smooth and controlled. "Miss Whitaker." Ella's skin went cold. "Who is this?" "This is Rowan Pierce," the voice said. "I'm Mr. Cade's communications director." Ella's breath caught. "Why are you calling me?" "Because this situation is escalating," Rowan said, calm as ice. "Mr. Cade denies any involvement, and we need to address the narrative before it becomes irreversible." Ella's grip tightened around the phone. "Narrative?" she repeated, voice trembling with anger. "This is my life." There was a pause, as if Rowan had to adjust his language to something more human. "I understand you're emotional, but you have to see the bigger picture." Ella's eyes stung. "The bigger picture is that I'm pregnant and I don't know how." Rowan's voice remained cool. "The bigger picture is that Mr. Cade's reputation is under attack. If you are seeking money, there are ways to handle this privately." Marlene snatched the phone from Ella's hand, so fast Ella didn't even have time to protest. "Do not speak to my daughter like that," Marlene snapped. "Do you hear me? Do not." Rowan's tone hardened. "Mrs. Whitaker, I'm trying to resolve." "You're trying to silence her," Marlene said, "and you will not." Hank leaned in, his voice thunderous. "Tell your billionaire to come say it to my face." Rowan paused. Then in a tone that made Ella's skin crawl, he said, "Mr. Cade will handle this through counsel." Marlene's eyes flashed. "Good, because we'll see you in court." She ended the call and handed the phone back to Ella with shaking hands. Ella swallowed hard. "He thinks I'm lying," Hank's face twisted. Of course he does. Men like that think everyone is trying to take from them. Ella's chest tightened. She couldn't breathe around the idea that the man whose name now haunted her life believed the worst of her. She went to her room and shut the door. She sat on the edge of her bed, staring at the wallpaper she'd had since high school, as if the familiar pattern could protect her. Her phone buzzed again. Unknown number. She ignored it. It buzzed a third time. Then a text appeared. "I'm coming." No name. No signature. Ella's heart leapt into her throat. She stared at the screen until her vision blurred. "I'm coming" could mean anyone. But deep down, she knew. Outside, a car engine hummed down the gravel driveway. Ella stood, legs trembling, and moved to the window. A sleek black vehicle rolled to a stop near the front porch, utterly out of place against the mud, the winter grass, the simple farmhouse that had held her whole life. The driver's door opened. A man stepped out. Tall, controlled. Dark coat, clean lines, expensive shoes that should have sunk into the gravel, but somehow didn't. He moved like he was used to being watched, like the world had always been his audience. Even from a distance, Ella could feel the weight of him. Mason Cade, the Dubai Maharaja. Her breath caught, not with admiration, not with desire, but with the shock of reality arriving at her doorstep. Marlene appeared behind Ella in the hallway, her voice tight. "Ella," she whispered, "stay back." Hank stormed out onto the porch like a man ready to fight God himself. Ella's hand pressed to her chest, over the cross, over the frantic beating of her heart. She watched Mason walk toward the porch, slow and steady, his eyes fixed on Hank first, then lifting, until they landed on the window, on her. For the first time, Mason Cade saw Ella Whitaker, and for the first time Ella felt the strange, terrifying certainty that whatever happened next would change her life forever. The porch light was still on, even though the afternoon sun hadn't fully fallen. It cast a pale glow over the wooden boards, over Hank Whitaker's rigid shoulders, over the cold air that made every breath look like a confession. Mason Cade stopped at the bottom step, not because he was afraid, but because something in the scene told him to respect the border. The Whitaker farm wasn't just land. It was a sanctuary. The kind of place money couldn't buy and power couldn't enter without being noticed. Hank's voice cut through the air like a blade. "You lost your mind coming here." Mason's face didn't change, but his eyes did. They flicked once toward the driveway where his security vehicle idled, then back to Hank, calm and controlled. "I didn't come to provoke you. You came to threaten us," Hank snapped. "I came to stop this from getting worse," Mason replied. Behind the living room curtains, Ella stood very still. She could see the line of Mason's shoulders through the glass, the way his coat fit him like he'd been made for expensive rooms and cameras. She could also see something she hadn't expected. Restraint. He wasn't storming in. He wasn't shouting. He wasn't acting like the man the internet had painted. Arrogant, untouchable, cruel. He looked tense, as if he were holding a storm inside his own ribs. Marlene's hand rested gently on Ella's back, grounding her. "Don't go out there yet," she murmured. Ella nodded, but she couldn't stop watching. Hank stepped forward, blocking the door as if his body alone could keep Mason from infecting their life. "Say what you came to say." Mason's jaw tightened once. He looked past Hank, toward the window, and for a heartbeat his gaze met Ella's. Not like a man claiming something, like a man finding something. Ella's breath caught. It wasn't attraction that struck her first. It was the sharp awareness of being seen, not as a headline, as a person. Mason's voice lowered. "I need to talk to Ella." Hank let out a harsh laugh. "No, you don't." "I do," Mason said, still controlled, but the edge in his tone was unmistakable. "Because she's the one being destroyed out here." Ella's throat tightened. She didn't know why that sentence hit her so hard. Maybe because it was the first time someone outside her family had said out loud what she'd been feeling in her bones, that the story wasn't gossip, it was violence. Hank's eyes narrowed. "You think you're the victim?" Mason didn't flinch. "No, I think she is." Hank's hands curled into fists, but before he could speak again, Marlene stepped forward. Her voice was calm, and that calm carried a quiet authority that made even Hank hesitate. "Hank," she said softly, "let him speak. Not because he deserves it, because we deserve answers." Hank's head snapped toward her. "Marlene!" "We deserve to hear what he has to say," she repeated firmer. "Then we decide what happens next." Ella's heart pounded so hard she could feel it in her wrists. Her legs moved before her fear could stop them. She stepped into the doorway, light spilling around her, and everything went quiet. Mason's eyes locked on her. Ella hated herself for noticing details in that instant. How controlled his breathing was, how his expression tried to stay unreadable and failed in subtle ways. The faint tension at the corner of his mouth. The way his gaze softened almost imperceptibly when it lingered on her face. He looked like a man who had been trained to be untouchable, standing in front of something he couldn't manage with money. Ella's voice came out smaller than she wanted. "You wanted to talk to me." Mason's throat moved as he swallowed. "Yes." Hank shifted, ready to pull Ella back behind him. Mason lifted a hand slightly, palm open, a gesture that said he wasn't here to dominate. "I'm not here to intimidate you," he said, speaking to Ella directly now. "And I'm not here to accuse you." Ella's chest tightened. "Your PR director did." Mason's eyes darkened. "I know." The air between them changed, charged, tense, heavy with everything that hadn't been said. Mason took a careful step forward, stopping again before the first stare. "I'm sorry for that call. It shouldn't have happened." Ella's fingers curled around the edge of the door frame. "Do you believe I'm lying?" The question came out raw. It wasn't dramatic. It was desperate. It was the kind of question you asked when you were holding yourself together by your fingernails. Mason stared at her for a long moment, and Ella felt like she was being measured, not for beauty, not for charm, but for truth. Then he said quietly, "No." Ella blinked, as if she'd misheard. Mason's voice remained steady. "I don't believe you're lying." Something inside Ella cracked, not into despair, but into trembling relief that made her knees feel weak. It was ridiculous. He was a stranger, a billionaire, a name that had invaded her life like a storm. And yet the simple fact that he believed her felt like someone loosening a rope around her ribs. Hank barked a laugh full of disbelief. "Then why did your people call her a gold digger?" Mason's jaw clenched. "Because they're trained to assume an attack." Ella's voice sharpened with sudden pain. "And am I an attack?" Mason's gaze flicked to her hands gripping the doorway, to the tremble she was trying to hide. "No," he said again, and this time the word held weight. "You're not." Marlene's hand slid into Ella's, squeezing once. Ella drew a shaky breath. Mason glanced toward the driveway again. "May I come inside, just to talk, with your family present?" Hank's eyes were dangerous. "No." Ella surprised herself. "We can talk in the kitchen," she said. Hank turned sharply. Ella's voice shook, but she didn't back down. "Dad, please." She swallowed. "I need to hear him. I need to look him in the eye and understand what's happening." Marlene nodded once, supporting her. Hank's chest rose and fell, then he stepped aside with a warning in his posture. "One wrong move," he muttered. Mason climbed the steps slowly. When he reached the porch, the distance between him and Ella shrank until she could see details she hadn't from the window. The clean lines of his coat, the subtle scent of something expensive and restrained, the faint shadow of stubble along his jaw that made him look more human than the magazine cover ever had. His gaze dropped briefly to the small silver cross at her collarbone, then back to her face. It wasn't lust in his eyes. It was something quieter, something like respect. Inside, the farmhouse felt even smaller with him in it. The kitchen was warm, worn, filled with the scent of bread and the hum of an old refrigerator. Mason looked out of place in the doorway, like a painting hung in the wrong room. Yet he didn't sneer at it. He didn't look around like he was judging. He looked careful, as if he understood that everything here mattered. Ella sat at the kitchen table. Marlene sat beside her. Hank remained standing, arms crossed, as if his body were the final lock on the door. Mason removed his coat and draped it neatly over the back of a chair he didn't sit in yet. He stayed standing too, as if sitting would be too intimate, too presumptuous. "I'm going to say this plainly," Mason began. "I have never met you before today." Ella nodded. "I know. And I don't know how you ended up pregnant," Mason continued, voice tight. "But I do know that the paternity trace you were shown is consistent with information I have on my side." Hank's eyes sharpened. "What information?" Mason hesitated, then spoke with the kind of restraint that told Ella he hated revealing anything personal. "I have genetic material stored under a private medical program. It's supposed to be locked down, no access without multiple authorizations." Ella's stomach twisted. "Why would you have that stored?" Mason's jaw tightened, as if he'd swallowed something bitter. "Because after my wife died, my doctors recommended I preserve options for the future. It was insurance against grief." His voice lowered. "I didn't think I'd ever use it. But it exists." Silence settled over the room. Ella's heart squeezed at the word wife, not because she was jealous, she didn't even know him, but because she recognized the shape of loss in the way he said it. The way he didn't expand, didn't dramatize, as if grief was a private room he kept locked. Marlene's voice was gentle. "And you're saying someone accessed it?" "Yes," Mason said. His eyes hardened. "There was an alert in my system last week. Someone attempted to pull records related to my stored material. My team flagged it as a security incident." Hank leaned forward slightly. "So you knew something was wrong before you came here?" Mason's gaze flicked to Ella. "I suspected." Ella's throat tightened. "Then why did your PR director call me like that?" Mason's expression tightened with a flash of anger. "Because he didn't have all the facts. And because I wasn't there to stop him." Ella's voice trembled. "But you let him." Mason's eyes held hers. "You're right," he said quietly. "I did." The admission shocked her more than a denial would have. It was too honest, too human. Mason took a slow breath. "I came here because I can't let your life be crushed under this." His gaze dropped briefly, then lifted again. "And because if your pregnancy is connected to the breach, then this isn't just a scandal. It's a crime." Marlene's fingers tightened around Ella's hand. "What are you proposing?" Mason's voice remained calm, but the intensity beneath it made the room feel smaller. "We need a legal team, a serious one. Independent testing, preservation of evidence. We need access logs from the hospital system. We need to stop this from being buried." Hank scoffed. "And you think your money will fix it?" Mason's gaze snapped to him, sharp. "No." He paused, then said something that made Hank's expression shift, if only slightly. "I think my money is the only reason they won't be able to ignore it." Ella's heart pounded. She hated that it was true. She hated that the world listened to wealth faster than it listened to women. Mason's attention returned to Ella. "I'm not asking you to sign anything tonight. I'm not asking you for silence." He spoke carefully, as if every word mattered. "I'm asking you to let me fight this with you." Ella swallowed hard. "Why?" The question came out before she could stop it. Why would a man like him involve himself? Why would he step into her mess instead of buying his way out? Mason's gaze softened, and the room seemed to hush around it. "Because someone hurt you," he said, low and steady. "And they did it using me." Ella's breath caught. Mason's voice tightened with contained fury. "My name is being used as a weapon. Your body is being treated like a battleground, and that's not—" He stopped, as if searching for the right word. "That's not something I can accept." Something inside Ella trembled, the dangerous kind of tremble that came when hope tried to rise. She hated hope. Hope made you vulnerable. Hope made you believe things you couldn't afford to believe. Marlene's eyes were wet, but her tone was practical. "What about the media? They're already circling." Mason's gaze hardened. "I can reduce that. Security, private routes, legal notices for trespassing." His eyes flicked to Ella again. "But I can't erase the story overnight." Ella's voice was small. They think I trapped you. Mason's jaw clenched. Then we make them choke on the truth. The intensity in his words sent a shiver through her. Not fear. Something else. A strange, aching pull. Because no one had spoken about her like she was worth defending outside of her family. Hank stepped closer, looming. And what do you want from her? Mason didn't flinch. Nothing. Hank's eyes narrowed. Men like you always want something. Mason's gaze held Hank's, then shifted to Ella. I want her safe, he said simply. I want the evidence intact. I want the people responsible exposed. Ella's throat tightened. And the baby? Mason's eyes flicked to her stomach, then back to her face. The look wasn't possessive. It was stunned, heavy with responsibility. I don't know how to feel about that yet, he admitted quietly, but I know this. His voice lowered. I won't abandon you to carry this alone. The words landed softly, but they hit her like thunder. Ella stared at him, and for a moment the room fell away. The kitchen, her parents, the fear. All she could see was the man standing across from her, the billionaire whose name had detonated her life, looking at her as if she were not disposable. Her voice came out in a whisper. You don't even know me. Mason's eyes softened again, and something in his expression looked like quiet pain. Then let me start. Ella's breath caught. The sentence was simple, but it felt intimate, dangerous. Marlene cleared her throat, pulling the moment back to reality. If we agree, what happens tonight? Mason's gaze remained on Ella. Tonight, I leave you with peace. Tomorrow, I bring a lawyer who answers to the truth, not to the hospital. He glanced at Hank. And if you allow it, I place security outside the property line, not inside. Your rules. Hank's jaw flexed. He wanted to refuse out of pride alone. Ella surprised herself again. Yes, she said softly. Hank whipped toward her. Ella's eyes burned, but she held his gaze. Dad, I'm scared. Her voice cracked on the last word. And I can't do this with just our anger. We need someone who can fight them. Hank's expression twisted, pain and rage battling in his eyes. Then he exhaled sharply. Fine, he muttered, outside the property line. Mason nodded once, respectful. Thank you. The moment should have felt like business, like strategy. But when Mason turned to leave, he paused near Ella's chair. He didn't touch her. He didn't lean in. He simply looked at her as if he wanted to memorize her face, every fragile, brave line of it, before stepping back into the chaos outside. His voice dropped, meant for her alone. I'm sorry you're in this. Ella's lips trembled. I didn't ask for it. I know, Mason said, and then quieter still. But I'm here. Ella's heart lurched. The words were nothing, 2 syllables. And yet they felt like the first solid ground she'd touched since the world cracked open. Mason stepped out onto the porch. The cold air swallowed him. The black vehicle waited in the driveway like a shadow. Before he descended the steps, he turned once more, his gaze lifting to the kitchen window. Ella was still there, watching him through the glass. Their eyes met again, held for a fraction longer than they should have. In that silence, Ella felt it. The tension that had nothing to do with headlines. The fragile beginning of something that could become love, if the world didn't destroy it first. Mason finally looked away and walked down the steps, leaving the porch light glowing behind him like a fragile promise. Inside the farmhouse, Ella remained at the table, her mother's hand warm over hers, her father pacing like a storm. But something had shifted. For the first time, the name Mason Cade didn't feel like a sentence. It felt like a question. And Ella, trembling and terrified, realized she wanted to know the answer. The first night after Mason Cade came to the farm, Ella Whitaker slept as if her body didn't trust silence anymore. Every sound felt suspicious. The wind tapping the window, the old house settling, a distant engine on the road. She woke more than once with her heart racing and her hand on her cross, pressing it hard enough to leave a faint mark on her skin. Each time she opened her eyes, she expected to see cameras outside, strangers in the yard, headlines printed across the darkness like a curse. But when the morning came, There was only pale light over the fields and the thin frost glittering on the grass. And something else. A black SUV parked at the far edge of the property line, exactly where Hank had allowed it. Not on their land, not inside their sanctuary. Close enough to be a shield. Ella stood at the kitchen window, holding a mug of tea between both hands. She watched a security guard step out briefly, scan the road, then return to the vehicle. The presence should have felt invasive. Instead, it felt like a quiet promise. Marlene moved behind her, adjusting the collar of Ella's cardigan the way she'd done since Ella was a child. "Did you sleep?" "A little," Ella lied. Marlene didn't argue. She simply kissed Ella's temple and murmured, "We're going to get through this." Hank entered the kitchen with a hard stride, his face still bruised with anger from the last 24 hours. He didn't speak right away. He only glanced at the SUV and grunted like a man swallowing pride. "They better not step an inch onto this land," he said. "They haven't," Marlene answered. Ella's phone buzzed on the table, an unknown number. Her stomach tightened, but when she looked at the screen, the message was short, clean, almost strangely simple. "Camille Sutter, attorney. Mr. Cade asked me to reach out. May I call?" Ella stared at the words until her vision blurred. A lawyer, a real one. Not a local family friend who'd politely ask for records and receive polite refusal. A woman who worked in the world where institutions feared consequences. Hank leaned over her shoulder, reading. "Call her," he said, voice rough. "Now!" Ella's fingers trembled as she pressed the number. Camille's voice came through steady and warm, without softness that would insult a person's pain. "Miss Whitaker." "Yes," Ella whispered. "This is Camille Sutter. I represent Mr. Cade in this matter. And if you choose, I will represent you as well, independently with your consent and in your best interest." Her tone was crisp, precise. "I want to begin by saying this. You are not a tabloid character. You are a patient, and your medical rights matter." Ella swallowed hard. Can you help us?" "I can," Camille replied. "But we have to move quickly. Hospitals protect themselves. If evidence disappears, it's harder to hold anyone accountable." Hank leaned in, voice sharp. "What do we do?" Camille didn't hesitate. "We preserve evidence. We demand audit logs and access records. We request chain of custody documentation for every test that produced Mr. Cade's name. And we initiate an independent medical evaluation for Miss Whitaker." Ella's pulse hammered. "Independent?" "Yes," Camille said. "Not affiliated with that hospital system. We confirm facts, not feelings." Marlene's hand covered Ella's shoulder, grounding her. Camille continued, "I can be on site today. I prefer to meet in person, with your full family present, your home if you're comfortable." Hank's jaw tightened, then he nodded, even though Camille couldn't see it. "Here," he said. "You come here." "Understood," Camille replied. "One more thing, Miss Whitaker. I need you to be careful about what you say publicly, not because you should be silent, because the wrong people will twist anything you say." Ella's throat tightened. "They already did." "I know," Camille said. "We will correct the narrative with the truth, but the truth has to be protected." When the call ended, the farmhouse felt heavy with purpose. Hank paced again, but it wasn't helpless pacing. It was the pacing of a man preparing for war. Marlene began gathering papers, everything from clinic receipts to hospital printouts, neatly stacking them as if order could keep panic out. Ella stood in the middle of it all, still holding her mug of tea, feeling like a storm had chosen her as its center. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was a different number, and the text was even shorter. "I'm outside. Not coming in unless you want me to." Ella's breath caught. Mason. She went to the window and saw him standing near the end of the driveway, far enough that Hank wouldn't accuse him of trespassing, close enough that the distance felt like an invitation. He wasn't wearing a suit today, just dark trousers, a simple sweater, and a coat that looked expensive but understated. His hands were in his pockets, shoulders slightly hunched against the cold, as if he were trying to look less like a billionaire and more like a man who didn't belong to the chaos he carried. Ella didn't know why. but her heart reacted before her mind could reason. A tight pull in her chest, a strange awareness of the air between them, even through glass. Marlene appeared beside her. "Do you want to talk to him?" Ella's lips parted. She didn't know what she wanted. She only knew that the idea of him leaving without speaking felt wrong in a way that surprised her. She nodded once. Hank saw it from across the room and stiffened. "Ella, I'll be on the porch," Ella said quietly. Hank's face hardened. "I'm coming." Ella turned toward him, and there was a softness in her eyes that was also steel. "Dad," she said gently, "please, just let me have a minute." Hank stared at her, and Ella saw how hard this was for him. He wanted to protect her by controlling every inch of her world, but he couldn't. Not anymore. Marlene touched his arm. "Hank," she said softly, "trust her." Hank exhaled. His shoulders dropped a fraction. "Fine," he muttered, "but I'm right here." Ella stepped outside. The cold air hit her cheeks, crisp and bright. The porch boards creaked beneath her boots. Mason didn't move at first. He waited as if she were the one with power here, as if her choice mattered more than his timing. When she reached the edge of the porch, he lifted his eyes to her, and Ella felt the full weight of his attention like a hand pressing gently against her ribcage. "Are you okay?" Mason asked. Ella almost laughed. It was such a simple question, so inadequate and yet so intimate it made her throat tighten. "No," she admitted, "but I'm standing." A faint, restrained smile flickered at the corner of his mouth, gone as quickly as it appeared. "That counts." Ella hugged her arms around herself. "Your lawyer called." "Camille," Mason said, nodding once. "She's the best person I trust with this." Ella's gaze sharpened. "Do you trust many people?" Mason's eyes darkened with something that looked like honesty and pain. "Not enough." Ella didn't know what to do with that answer. It felt too personal, too vulnerable. She swallowed. "Why are you here?" Mason looked down at the gravel for a moment, then back at her. "Because last night I left you in the middle of a fire," he said, voice low. "And I realized I couldn't do that." Ella's heart did something strange, a quick ache she didn't want to name. "You didn't start it?" Ella said. Mason's jaw tightened. "My name is part of it, and that means I have responsibility." Ella's voice trembled despite her effort to keep it steady. "People keep saying I did this on purpose." Mason's gaze held hers, unwavering. "And they're wrong." Ella blinked hard. "Why do you sound so sure?" Mason took a slow breath. His voice softened, almost reluctantly. "Because I saw your face when that name was said." He paused. "No one can fake that kind of shock." Ella felt heat rush to her cheeks, humiliation mixing with relief. She hated being observed in her weakest moment. Yet something in the way he said it didn't feel like judgment. It felt like recognition. Mason shifted slightly, stepping closer but stopping again before the porch boundary. "Camille will do what she does best. But there are other parts of this I need to handle." Ella's pulse quickened. "What parts?" "Security," he said. "Media harassment. Your privacy." His eyes narrowed slightly. "Someone got a photo of your truck at that office. That means someone is watching you. That doesn't happen by accident." Ella's stomach twisted. The idea of being watched made her skin crawl. Mason's voice dropped. "If you want, I can have my people coordinate with your father so they stay outside the property line. It's your home, your rules." Ella's throat tightened. She didn't want to need him. Need felt like weakness, but safety wasn't weakness. "I don't want them on the land," she whispered. "I know," Mason said. "They won't be." Silence stretched between them, and in that silence, Ella became painfully aware of the small things. The way Mason's eyes flicked to her hands as she hugged herself, the way his gaze softened when he noticed her shiver. He took off his coat. Ella's breath caught. The gesture was so simple, it shouldn't have meant anything. But then Mason lifted the coat slightly, a quiet offer, not touching her, not stepping closer without permission. "You're cold," he said. Ella stared at the coat. Pride rose like a wall inside her. Then a gust of wind cut through her sweater, and her body betrayed her with a shiver. Mason didn't move. He didn't insist. He waited. Ella stepped forward slowly, and when she reached him, she hesitated. Their proximity made the air feel thick. She could smell him, clean, subtle, something expensive that wasn't overpowering. She could see the faint tension in his jaw, as if he were trying very hard to keep himself contained. Ella whispered, "I don't want people thinking—" "I don't care what they think," Mason interrupted gently. His eyes held hers, steady and calm. "I care what you need." Ella's throat tightened around a sudden emotion that felt dangerously close to tears. She nodded once, barely. Mason draped the coat over her shoulders carefully, not letting his hands linger, but his fingers brushed her sweater for a fraction of a second. That tiny contact sent a strange warmth through Ella, not erotic, not explicit, just electric in the way intimacy can be when it's restrained. Ella's breath hitched. Mason's eyes flicked to her lips, and then away so fast she almost wondered if she imagined it. Almost. The moment lasted only a heartbeat, but it left a mark. Ella looked down, fingers curling around the lapels of his coat. It was too big for her, too warm, too much like being held. Her voice came out soft. "Thank you." Mason's gaze stayed on her, and there was something in it that made Ella's chest ache. "You shouldn't have to thank me for basic decency." Ella's lips trembled. "Decency feels rare right now." Mason's jaw tightened with anger that he kept caged. "It won't be," he said quietly. "Not if I can help it." Behind the kitchen window, Hank watched like a hawk. Ella could feel his gaze, even without turning. She swallowed. "Camille is coming here," Ella said. Mason nodded. "Good. She'll move fast." Ella hesitated, then asked, Did you tell your PR director to stop?" Mason's eyes darkened. "I told him to stop speaking as if you're a problem to manage." Ella's heart squeezed. "And did he listen?" A pause. Mason's voice turned colder. "He will." The certainty in that sentence made Ella shiver, and not just from the cold. Mason looked toward the fields, then back. "I need to go. If I stay, the cameras will show up. They have people tracking my movements." Ella's stomach dropped. "Already?" Mason's gaze softened again. "They never stopped." Ella wanted to ask how he lived like that, always hunted by attention. But the question felt too intimate, too soon. Still, she couldn't stop the words from slipping out. "Does it ever get lonely?" Mason's eyes held hers for a long moment. The silence that followed was so full it made Ella's pulse race. Then Mason spoke, voice low, almost rough. "Yes." The single word hit her like a confession. Not dramatic, just true. Ella didn't know what to say. Her throat felt tight. Mason exhaled slowly. "Today will be ugly," he added. "Camille will push hard. The hospital will push back. But you need to remember something." His gaze sharpened, intent. "You didn't do anything wrong." Ella's eyes burned. She nodded. Mason's voice softened. "And you're not alone." The words echoed what Marlene had told her, yet hearing them from Mason made them feel different. He wasn't family. He didn't owe her comfort. And still, he offered it. Ella whispered, "You're sure you believe me?" Mason's gaze didn't waver. "I'm sure." Ella's breath trembled out of her. For a moment, she let herself imagine what it would feel like if the world believed her the way he did, if she could walk into a room without shame crawling up her spine. Mason stepped back, reclaiming distance before it became something neither of them could control. "I'll be reachable through Camille," he said, "and if anything feels unsafe, you tell your father. He tells my security. Immediately." Ella nodded again. Mason turned to leave, then paused, glancing back at her as if he couldn't stop himself. His voice lowered, quiet enough that the wind almost stole it. "Ella." Hearing her name in his mouth sent a small tremor through her. "Yes," she whispered. Mason's eyes softened with something that looked almost like regret. "I'm sorry you're carrying this." Ella hugged the coat tighter. "I didn't want any of it. "I know," Mason said. The pause that followed was thick with everything unspoken. Then Mason did something that made Ella's heart stutter. He lifted his hand, hovering near her cheek, not touching, not crossing a line, just a gesture of instinct, as if he wanted to wipe away the fear he could see. He stopped himself, fingers curling back into his palm. The restraint was its own kind of tenderness. Ella's breath caught. She didn't move. She couldn't. Mason's voice was rougher when he spoke again. "Let Camille fight," he murmured. "Let me protect the perimeter. And you keep breathing," Ella whispered almost helplessly. "That's all." Mason's gaze held hers. Intense. "For now," he said softly. Then he turned and walked back toward the SUV, leaving Ella standing on the porch with his coat around her shoulders, her heart pounding like it had learned a new rhythm. An hour later, Camille Sutter arrived in a sleek car that looked expensive but practical, the kind of vehicle chosen by someone who didn't need to impress. She stepped out with a leather folder under her arm and eyes that took in everything at once. The road, the fence line, the black SUV at the edge of the property, Hank's posture on the porch, Ella's pale face. Camille greeted Hank first. "Mr. Whitaker." She offered her hand, firm and professional. "I understand you're angry. I'm going to use that anger productively." Hank's lips pressed together, but he shook her hand. "Good." Camille looked at Marlene. "Mrs. Whitaker." Then at Ella, her voice softening slightly. "Miss Whitaker." Ella nodded, clutching Mason's coat closer without realizing she was doing it. Inside the kitchen, Camille spread papers across the table with the efficiency of someone preparing for battle. "Here's what we do today," she said. "First, we document everything you've already been told. Second, we send immediate preservation letters to the hospital system. Third, we schedule independent medical confirmation." Hank leaned over the table, eyes sharp. "They'll ignore us." Camille's smile was brief, and it wasn't kind. "They'll try." Marlene's voice trembled. "Can they destroy records?" Camille's gaze was steady. "They can try to hide, but if they alter logs after receiving preservation notice, it becomes worse for them." Ella's stomach twisted. "So they might—" Camille nodded slightly. "Yes, which is why we move fast." Ella's chest tightened. The war wasn't just legal. It was time. Camille slid a paper toward Ella. "I need your consent for representation. This protects you. It ensures no one speaks for you without your permission." Ella's fingers trembled as she picked up the pen. Hank's voice softened barely. "It's okay, baby." Ella looked at her father, then at her mother, then down at the paper. She signed. The pen stroke was small, but it felt like drawing a line in the sand. Camille gathered the papers, eyes sharp. "Good," she said. "Now we fight." Outside, the winter light shifted over the fields. Somewhere down the road, a car slowed, then continued. Ella didn't know yet that every move they made would be watched, twisted, and tested. But she knew one thing. For the first time since her life cracked open, she wasn't just surviving. She was stepping into the storm with a shield beside her. And even though Mason Cade was still a stranger with a name that burned like a headline, Ella could not deny the quiet truth that pulsed beneath the fear. When he looked at her, he didn't see scandal. He saw her, and that, more than his money, more than his power, was the first thing that made her believe she might someday breathe without shame. The day after Camille Sutter's arrival unfolded like a storm preparing to strike. The clouds were low and heavy, the winter light dim and uncertain, as if even the sky held its breath. Ella moved through the farmhouse quietly, her body tired but her mind unable to rest. The walls felt different now, charged with tension, with fear, with something else she couldn't name, and with every passing minute, Mason Cade's coat remained draped around her shoulders like a memory she couldn't put away. Hank had tried to convince her to give it back, insisting they should owe Mason nothing. But Ella couldn't, not because she wanted to keep a piece of him, she told herself. No, it was because the coat felt like armor, and today she needed every layer of protection she could get. Camille stood at the kitchen table again, sleeves rolled up, dark hair pinned back, the table covered with documents, timelines, printed screenshots, and handwritten statements. She moved with clean efficiency, her calm presence grounding the chaos around her. "Miss Whitaker," she said without looking up, "we will need to go to the medical center today, not the one you visited before. A private office. You're safe there." Ella's chest tightened. She hated that fear had become part of every decision. "Do I have to?" "Yes," Camille said gently, finally meeting her eyes. "Because facts are your shield right now." Marlene placed a warm hand on Ella's back. "We'll go with you." Hank grunted. "All of us." Camille nodded. "That's fine, but we keep a low profile." Low profile. Ella almost smiled at the irony. Nothing in her life had been low profile since the moment Mason Cade's name appeared on a document. Just thinking of him made Ella's stomach flutter with something she refused to examine too closely. She hadn't seen him since the morning before, but she kept replaying the way he'd looked at her when he handed her the coat. The distance he maintained, the boundaries he refused to cross, the restraint in everything except his eyes. It shouldn't matter, but it did. A soft vibration on the table broke her thoughts. Ella's phone buzzed with a new message, unknown number. She hesitated before opening it. "Let me know when you leave. My team will monitor the route." Her breath caught. She didn't need to ask who it was. Mason. Ella stared at the message, her heart tightening. He didn't say he wanted updates. He didn't ask for anything from her. He didn't pressure, didn't intrude. He simply offered protection in the quiet way he always did. She didn't reply. Not yet. Hank saw her hesitation. "Is that him?" Ella nodded. Hank wiped a hand across his jaw. "He shouldn't be involved this deeply." Camille's voice slid in calmly. "He already is. And strategically, it helps. The hospital system cannot ignore a man with his influence." Hank muttered something under his breath, but he didn't argue. Ella slipped the phone into her pocket, her fingers brushing over the message again as if it might burn her skin. When they finally left the farmhouse, the cold air hit her cheeks with sharp clarity. The frost glittered on the ground, and the gravel crunched beneath their boots as they walked to the truck. The black SUV at the property line adjusted its position slightly, a subtle shift that made Ella feel watched and safe at the same time. Hank opened the truck door for her. "Get in, baby." Ella climbed inside, her nerves tightening with each step. Marlene slid in next to her. Camille sat in the back seat with her folder and phone ready. Hank started the engine. The world outside the windows felt hostile, full of shadows where whispers hid. Ella kept her gaze low until her phone buzzed again. A new message. "Leaving now?" Ella swallowed before typing back. "Yes." The reply came seconds later. "Understood." She didn't know why that single word sent warmth through her chest. As they drove further down the road, another SUV merged discreetly behind them, keeping a perfect distance. Camille glanced back once, then returned to her notes. An hour later, they arrived at a quiet medical office on the outskirts of the county. It didn't look like a clinic, more like a renovated home with a private entrance and tinted windows. A woman in a lab coat greeted them at the door, her expression soft but serious. "Miss Whitaker, this way, please." Ella stepped inside slowly. Her pulse pounded. Every exam room she'd entered recently had turned into a battlefield. She half expected this one to do the same. But the lighting was warm, the room small and calm. There were no buzzing machines, no fluorescent glare that made her feel like a specimen, only quiet. The doctor spoke gently. "We're not here to judge, we're here to verify." Ella nodded, her throat tight. Marlene squeezed her hand before she entered the exam room. Hank stood back, arms crossed, pretending he wasn't terrified. Camille waited in the hallway, phone pressed to her ear as she spoke in low, sharp sentences to someone on the other end. It took an hour, a long, trembling hour. When Ella finally stepped out, Marlene hugged her immediately. Hank's eyes glistened, but he blinked it away quickly. Camille approached. How are you feeling? Ella forced a breath. Scared. Camille's voice softened. You were brave. And everything was documented properly. Ella's shoulders sagged with relief she didn't fully trust yet. What happens now? Now, Camille said, we wait for confirmation. She paused. And we prepare for the hospital's response. Ella's stomach twisted. They'll try to discredit me. Camille's expression sharpened. They will try, and they will fail. Outside, the winter wind whipped against Ella's cheeks as they walked back to the truck. The security SUV shifted again, waiting for Hank to pull out. Ella's phone vibrated once more. Are you done? Her chest tightened. She typed back. Yes. A moment passed. I'm coming to speak with Camille. Ella blinked. Today? Now. She didn't know how to respond. She didn't know how to feel, but she felt something. Warmth surged through her chest. Fear, too. A strange blend she didn't know how to untangle. On the drive back, Hank grumbled, We don't need him here again. Camille didn't look up from her notes. Actually, his presence benefits you, and it benefits the truth. Marlene added softly, Ella needs every ally she can get. Hank didn't respond, but he didn't disagree. When they reached the farmhouse, Ella stepped out onto the porch again, breath visible in the cold air. She wasn't wearing Mason's coat now. She was holding it, folded carefully over her arm. She didn't know why she had brought it with her. She only knew that she couldn't leave it behind. Minutes later, a sleek black car approached. Not the SUV, but something quieter, something that didn't demand attention. Mason stepped out. Ella's heart reacted immediately. Not with fear, not with anger. With the same trembling awareness that had started yesterday, the one she tried desperately to ignore, but couldn't. He wasn't wearing a tie. His coat brushed the wind lightly. His hair moved just enough to soften the sharp angles of his face, but it was his eyes that hit her hardest. They found her first. They didn't scan the property. They didn't search for threats. They looked straight at her. Ella held the coat tighter. Mason approached, stopping at the first step of the porch again, respecting the boundary the same way he had before. He didn't assume access. He didn't push. He existed as if every move cost him restraint. Is everything all right? Mason asked softly. Ella nodded, though her voice trembled. The appointment went fine. His gaze softened. Good. Camille stepped outside then, sharp and composed. Mr. Cade, you're earlier than expected. I wanted to be here, Mason said. Hank appeared in the doorway, jaw tense, but he didn't interfere. Camille motioned toward the sitting room. We can talk inside. Mason looked to Ella as if waiting for her permission. Ella hesitated only a moment before saying, yes. The moment their eyes met, something tightened between them, fragile and powerful all at once. Inside the house, the sitting room felt warmer than usual. Mason removed his coat and draped it neatly over the arm of a chair. When he sat, he kept his posture disciplined, hands clasped loosely in front of him, eyes steady. Camille opened her folder. We need to discuss strategy. Mason nodded. Tell me everything. As Camille spoke, outlining the hospital's evasiveness, the gaps in the records, the suspicious timing of the breach, Ella watched Mason out of the corner of her eye. The more Camille explained, the more Mason's expression changed. The calm, billionaire facade slowly dissolved into something sharper, something cold, something dangerous. His jaw tightened, his eyes darkened, his fingers curled subtly in his lap. When Camille finished, Mason's voice was low. They think they can hide this. Camille nodded. They're trying. Then they don't understand what they're up against, Mason said quietly. Ella shivered, not from fear but from the weight of the promise beneath his words. Camille added, the breach wasn't random, and it wasn't sloppy. Someone did this with intention, with access. Mason met her gaze, meaning someone inside the system. Exactly. Ella's voice came out barely audible. But why me? Mason turned to her slowly, and the room faded for a moment. His eyes were gentle now, softened by something Ella didn't understand, something that made her chest ache. "We will find out," he said. Ella swallowed. "And if the truth is worse than we think?" Mason leaned forward slightly, barely enough to shorten the distance between them. But in that small motion the entire room shifted. "Then I face it with you," he said quietly. Ella's breath caught. Camille cleared her throat to continue discussing legal steps, but Ella only heard half the words. She could barely think around the way Mason was looking at her. Not like she was a burden. Not like she was a headline, but like she mattered. When the meeting ended, and Camille stood to gather her papers, Mason remained seated. He didn't move until Ella did. She walked him to the door. The cold air rushed in, brushing against them both. Mason paused. His breath fogged in the air between them. "Ella," he said softly. She looked up, her heart pounding so hard it made her chest tremble. Mason's eyes held something unspoken, wanting but restrained. Admiration, but careful. A tenderness that terrified her more than the scandal, because it threatened to change everything she believed about herself. "I meant what I said yesterday," he murmured. Ella whispered, "Which part?" Mason's voice lowered to something warm and rough. "You're not alone." Ella's lips parted, emotion rising like a tide she couldn't contain. She held out his coat with both hands. "This is yours." Mason didn't reach for it. For a moment, he simply stood there, eyes locked on hers. Then he lifted his hand and gently folded her fingers around the fabric. "Keep it," he said. Ella's breath hitched. "Why?" His gaze softened. "Because you looked warmer wearing it." Her heart stuttered, her voice trembled. "Mason." He swallowed once carefully. "Ella." They stood inches apart, the cold air swirling around them, the porch light glowing faintly above. The space between them felt electrified, full of something fragile and impossible and undeniable. And in that suspended moment, Ella understood that whatever force had brought Mason Cade into her life wasn't done shaping it. She didn't know what would happen next, but for the first time, she wanted to find out. The morning after Camille's strategy meeting began quietly, almost deceptively so. A silver mist lay across the fields, drifting low over the frozen grass, as if hiding the world beneath a soft veil. Ella stood barefoot at her bedroom window, one hand resting on the pane, Mason's coat draped loosely around her shoulders. She hadn't meant to sleep in it, but sometime in the night, after twisting restlessly beneath her blanket, she'd pulled it close and let the lingering warmth and gentle weight lull her to sleep. Now, as dawn painted faint gold along the horizon, she breathed in the faint scent clinging to the collar. Something clean, subtle, masculine. A quiet comfort she didn't want to admit she needed. Her chest tightened. "Get a hold of yourself," she whispered. "You barely know him." But the memory of his voice, low, steady, offering protection without expecting anything in return, echoed inside her like a quiet heartbeat. Downstairs, she could hear Marlene moving about the kitchen, the familiar clatter of pans grounding the morning in normalcy. Except nothing was normal anymore. Not the house, not the air, not the way Ella felt, like she was living inside a story someone else had written. She tightened the coat around herself one last time before reluctantly removing it, folding it carefully over the foot of her bed. She didn't know why she hesitated before leaving the room. Maybe because the coat felt like a piece of courage she wasn't sure she could carry without touching it. When she entered the kitchen, Marlene turned, holding a steaming cup of tea. "You're up early." Couldn't sleep," Ella admitted. Marlene set the cup on the table. "None of us can." Hank sat at the table with a newspaper he wasn't actually reading. He lifted his eyes, scanning his daughter's face with a mixture of worry and frustration. "Any more messages from him?" Ella shook her head. "Not since yesterday." Hank grunted, half relieved, half something else. Something Ella didn't want to unpack. Before she could sit, Camille entered the kitchen holding her phone, her expression sharp but energized. "We need to prepare," she said. "The hospital responded at dawn." Ella felt every muscle in her body tense. "Already?" "Yes," Camille replied. They've sent a statement through legal channels claiming full compliance and denying any breach. Hank slammed the table lightly. Of course they did. Marlene shot him a warning look, then turned toward Camille. What does that mean for us? Camille exhaled, pressing a hand to her hip. It means they're scared, and when institutions get scared, they get creative. Ella swallowed. Creative how? They'll try to bury records, Camille said calmly. Discredit witnesses, frame your case as a misunderstanding, position you as confused or motivated. Ella's stomach twisted. Motivated by what? Camille's gaze softened slightly. Money, sympathy, attention. Ella lowered her head, shame threatening to seep into her skin like cold water. But Camille stepped closer, placing a hand on her shoulder. Ella, look at me. Ella lifted her eyes. You are the truth in this story, Camille said. The hospital is trying to survive. We are trying to reveal that difference matters. Ella's breath trembled out of her. So what do we do today? We gather every detail, Camille said. Every memory, every person you spoke to, every form you filled. And we prepare to make our request public if necessary. Hank looked up sharply. Public? Camille nodded. If they refuse transparency, we force it. With evidence, not emotion. Marlene stepped over, brushing a strand of hair out of Ella's face. We're right beside you. Ella nodded, though her chest felt tight enough to break. But the day had more in store. 2 hours later, after the paperwork and statements and timelines had begun to overwhelm the farmhouse table, Ella stepped outside to breathe. The air was crisp, biting, and the sky had warmed to a pale blue. She wrapped her arms around herself and walked down the small path toward the edge of the yard. The security SUV was parked discreetly in its usual position. She had grown accustomed to seeing it, though she still hated how necessary it felt. A figure stood beside it, tall, dark coat, shoulders broad and unmistakable. Ella's breath hitched. Mason. She hadn't expected him, at least not this early, not without warning. But there he was, standing with one hand in his pocket, the other holding his phone loosely. His gaze rose the moment she stepped into the light. He didn't smile. He didn't wave, but the way his eyes softened when he saw her hit her like a warm wind in winter. Ella approached slowly, her boots crunching over the gravel. You're here early. I know, Mason said quietly. I didn't want to interrupt your morning. You didn't, she said, though her heart beat too fast for it to be true. His gaze traced her face, as if searching for signs of distress. How are you? Ella hesitated. She could lie. She could say she was fine, but something in his expression, the genuine concern, the patience, made her answer with truth. I'm scared. Mason stepped closer, just enough to bridge part of the distance between them. I know. The simple acknowledgement loosened something inside her. She looked down at her hands, twisting them unconsciously. Mason spoke again, voice low. Camille updated me. The hospital's denial was expected. Ella looked up. Expected? Institutions survive by pretending perfection, Mason said. But perfection doesn't exist. Only people do. And people lie when they're cornered. Ella exhaled shakily. Camille said they might twist things. They will, Mason said without hesitation. But we'll be ready. Ella blinked. We? Mason's jaw tightened at the word, and he corrected himself gently. You and Camille. But I won't let you walk into this alone. Ella's heart clenched. Why do you keep saying that? His voice softened. Because it feels important that you hear it. Ella looked away, trying to collect herself. What if the world doesn't believe me? Mason's reply was immediate. I will. Her breath caught. She couldn't look at him for a moment. The words echoed inside her chest, settling into the spaces fear had carved out. After a long silence, Mason asked softly, Can I show you something? Ella looked back at him, confused. Now? Yes, Mason said. Just for a moment. He stepped aside, revealing the sleek interior of the SUV behind him. Not imposing, not flashy, just quiet, private, and safe. Ella hesitated. She knew Hank would disapprove. She knew Marlene would worry. But she also knew she didn't want to step back into the house just yet, where fear and paperwork sat waiting for her. She nodded. Mason opened the door for her, his hand brushing the edge of the frame near hers. The brush of his fingers sent a soft, electric shiver up her arm. Ella climbed in. Mason circled around and entered the driver's side. Inside, the hum of the engine and the faint warmth of the heater created a cocoon of stillness. It felt like a separate world. Mason pulled out a small tablet from the console and handed it to her. "Look." Ella tapped the screen. A headline appeared. Mason Cade issues statement. "Stop attacking her. She deserves truth, not speculation." Ella felt her heart stop. "Mason," she whispered, You spoke publicly?" "Yes." "But why?" she breathed. Mason turned slightly toward her, his expression deepening with something she couldn't decipher. "Because they were eating you alive, and they were using my silence as fuel." Ella's throat tightened. "And this won't make it worse?" "It will change the conversation," Mason said. "And right now, that's what matters." Ella's eyes scanned the short statement he'd released. Simple, direct, compassionate. No denial of involvement, no attack on her, just a clear demand for her dignity. "You didn't have to do this," she whispered. "Yes," Mason said quietly. "I did." Her breath trembled. She felt the weight of his words settle onto her skin, not as pressure, but as warmth, as care. She looked up at him, searching his face for something, logic, explanation, motive. Instead, she found a softness she had seen only in fleeting moments, a tenderness he tried to suppress. "Mason," she began, but emotion caught her voice. He leaned in the slightest bit, enough that she could see the faint line of stubble on his jaw, the tension in his throat, the softness in his gaze. "You don't have to say anything," he murmured. "Just breathe." Ella inhaled shakily, the cold air mixing with the warmth of the heater, the scent of him surrounding her. And for one suspended moment, the world outside ceased to exist. Mason didn't touch her, but he was close enough that she felt it anyway, the pull, the gravity, the impossible tenderness that neither of them dared name. He whispered, "I'm here." Ella closed her eyes briefly, letting the sound of his voice settle into her bones. When she opened them again, Mason was watching her with a quiet intensity that made her heart slam against her ribs. "Why are you helping me this much?" she asked, voice trembling. Mason exhaled slowly. "Because I can't stand the thought of you facing this alone." Her chest tightened. "You barely know me." "Then let me know you," he said softly. Ella didn't move. She barely breathed. She didn't know how long the silence lasted, only that it wrapped around them like a fragile, shimmering thread. Finally, Mason forced himself to lean back, breaking the spell with the gentlest possible motion. "We should go back inside," he said quietly, "before your father storms out here with a shotgun." Ella laughed softly. The sound surprised her. It felt like sunlight breaking through clouds. They stepped out of the SUV, the cold air wrapped around them, but after the warmth they'd shared, it felt less harsh. Before Ella walked away, Mason spoke again. "Ella." She turned. Mason stood a few feet away, hands in his pockets, breath fogging in the air. His eyes held hers, steady and warm. "You're stronger than you think." Ella's lips parted, but she couldn't speak. "And if you can't believe that yet," he added softly, "I'll believe it for you." Ella swallowed hard, emotion rising, threatening to spill. "Thank you," she whispered. Mason gave a small nod, the kind of nod that held more emotion than a declaration. As she walked back toward the farmhouse, the cold wind tugging at her hair, Ella felt the impossible truth she had been avoiding push its way into her consciousness. She trusted him. And the most terrifying, beautiful part, her heart wasn't fighting that trust anymore. The sun climbed reluctantly that morning, spreading a pale wash of gold across the frost-kissed fields. Ella stood at the kitchen sink, rinsing a mug she hadn't really used, her hands moving mechanically while her thoughts drifted unanchored. Every time the water splashed against porcelain, she remembered the warmth of Mason's voice inside the SUV, the low promise in his words, the way silence had wrapped around them like something almost sacred. She touched the collar of the sweater she wore and felt the faint indentation where Mason's coat had rested the night before. The memory slid over her skin like a whisper. "Ella, honey," Marlene said softly, approaching with a folded dish towel. "You're miles away." Ella forced a small smile. "Just thinking." Marlene studied her face, her own expression torn between worry and understanding. "You don't have to face everything today, one step at a time." Ella nodded, but the knot in her chest didn't loosen. Outside, the gravel shifted under heavy tires. Hank's low mutter filled the room. "He's back." Ella's heart wrenched upward, a startled beat that felt too loud inside her ribs. She moved toward the window without meaning to, drawn like a thread pulled taut. Mason's dark SUV stopped at the same respectful distance as before. But he didn't stay inside this time. He stepped out immediately, his breath a faint cloud in the cold morning air. He wore no tie, just a charcoal coat and a dark sweater that softened the sharp lines of his frame. His eyes, even from a distance, searched the house. Searched for her. Ella felt something warm bloom beneath her ribs. Hank grunted. "Man doesn't know the meaning of boundaries." Marlene placed a gentle hand on his arm. "Maybe he knows exactly what boundaries mean. That's why he stays outside them." Hank shot her a look, but the edge in his shoulders softened. Ella stepped outside before she could get trapped between her parents' arguments. The wind lifted her hair as she closed the door behind her. Frost crunched beneath her boots as she walked slowly toward Mason. He saw her immediately, and everything in him changed. His expression softened, his posture straightened, his hands slipped from his coat pockets as if freed by involuntary instinct. "Good morning," he said quietly, voice deepening with a softness that felt entirely for her. Ella drew a breath that felt too warm for the cold air. "Good morning." Their eyes held for a moment longer than necessary. A suspended heartbeat neither of them broke. Mason cleared his throat lightly. "I didn't want to interrupt your family. I just came to check on you before the day gets complicated." Ella nodded, her voice a whisper. "Thank you." He took a small step forward, then stopped himself, maintaining the respectful distance he always honored. "Camille has updates. She's preparing a formal request to the hospital as we speak." Ella felt her stomach knot. "They're still refusing." "Refusing," Mason said gently, "is exactly the kind of mistake guilty people make." Ella wrapped her arms around herself, not from cold, but from the weight of everything pressing into her. "I hate this," she whispered. "I hate that my whole life is being dissected." Mason's gaze softened deeply. "Your life is being stolen, not dissected." His voice dropped lower. "And I'm going to help you take it back." The wind blew harder then, rustling dry branches near the fence line. The world felt too big for a moment, too sharp, too loud. Ella shivered. Without thinking, Mason unbuttoned his coat. Ella's breath caught. "Mason, you don't have to—" "I know," he said softly, "but you're cold." His voice carried no pressure, only quiet insistence. He lifted the coat gently. Ella hesitated, half afraid of how familiar it felt already, half refusing to admit how deeply she needed the comfort. When she finally reached out, her fingers brushed his for a fleeting moment. The contact was brief, but the warmth of it spread through her like a secret. Mason draped the coat over her shoulders with reverence rather than ownership, his fingertips barely grazing the fabric near her collarbone, yet somehow the air around her tightened with the weight of his nearness. Ella lowered her gaze. "Thank you." Mason exhaled slowly. "You don't have to thank me for caring." The words hit her with delicate force. She lifted her eyes and saw something in his, something unguarded, something he didn't let the cameras see, something that made her pulse stumble. Ella tried to steady her voice. "Why does it matter so much to you?" Mason didn't look away. Because what's happening to you is wrong. His throat moved with a quiet swallow. And because yesterday, when you said you were scared, I felt it. Ella's lips parted, emotion rising. Why? His answer came in a whisper. Because I don't want you hurting. Her breath trembled. She couldn't speak. She couldn't think. The honesty in his tone was too much and not enough at the same time. A truck rumbled down the road, snapping the moment like a twig. Mason glanced at it, then back at her. Camille wants us all to meet in town today. There's someone she needs you to talk to. Ella's stomach tightened. Who? A nurse, Mason said. Someone who saw something and might be too afraid to speak unless she knows she's protected. Ella drew a sharp breath. Someone inside? Yes. The wind carried their silence, heavy with tension and possibility. Ella finally nodded. I'll go. Mason's relief was subtle but undeniable. I'll drive behind you, not in front, not beside, behind. His gaze held hers. You lead. Ella felt a fragile wave of gratitude rise inside her, because he respected her space, her agency, her fear. Because he didn't try to take her hand, yet somehow made her feel held. She whispered, okay. Mason seemed about to say something more, but the front door creaked. Hank stepped onto the porch, brows drawn together, arms crossed. Mason straightened slightly, his composure returning like armor snapping into place. Hank's voice cut the air. We leaving, or are we standing around freezing half the day? Ella flushed. Mason cleared his throat lightly. I'll follow. The ride into town felt long despite the familiar roads. Mason's SUV stayed behind them, exactly as he promised, always present but not imposing. Ella watched him through the rearview mirror, steady, constant, silent. When they reached the small law office Camille had chosen for privacy, Mason parked a short distance away. He didn't rush to her door. He waited until she stepped out, only then moving closer. Inside, the room was warmly lit, filled with dark wood furniture and quiet professionalism. Camille stood with her arms folded, her expression tight with unspoken tension. Thank you for coming, she said. We won't be long. Ella took a seat beside Marlene. Hank sat near the door. Mason stood behind Ella's chair, not touching her, not hovering, simply a presence, a line of gravity she could feel at her back. Camille gestured toward the door. Come in. A woman stepped inside. She looked young, mid-20s, with dark circles beneath her eyes and trembling hands clasped in front of her. Her hair was pulled back loosely. Her scrubs were a little wrinkled, as if she had rushed to be here. Ella blinked. You're from the hospital. The woman swallowed hard. Yes. My name is Naomi. Ella's heartbeat quickened. Naomi looked terrified. She kept glancing at the windows as if expecting someone to appear. Camille approached slowly, her voice calming but firm. You're safe here. No one from the hospital knows you've come. Naomi nodded weakly. I saw something, she whispered. Something wrong. Ella leaned forward, breath shaking. Please, what did you see? Naomi hesitated, her eyes flicking briefly to Mason. He didn't move, but his posture softened, his expression gentled, as if he understood her fear in ways others might miss. Naomi took a deep breath. I work in administration sometimes, logging results, storing records. Last week I noticed something strange in the system. Ella's pulse hammered. What? There was a patient file flagged for override access, she whispered. A file linked to donor material that isn't supposed to be touched. Ever. Her voice trembled. It was his. The air thickened. Ella felt her lungs struggle. Naomi's gaze darted to Mason, then to Camille. Whoever accessed it wasn't authorized. They shouldn't have been able to. And later that same day, her voice cracked. Your name appeared in the logs, Miss Whitaker, connected to a procedure you didn't sign for. Ella went cold. What? Naomi nodded, tears welling. I shouldn't have seen it. And when I did, I reported it to my supervisor, and he told me to forget it. That if I valued my job, I would stop asking questions. Marlene clasped her hand over her mouth to stifle a gasp. Hank muttered a curse under his breath, gripping the arms of his chair. Ella felt the world tilt. Someone did this intentionally? Naomi's hands shook violently. Yes. She looked at Ella with raw guilt. And I'm so sorry. You didn't deserve any of this. Ella's vision blurred. Mason stepped closer instinctively, not touching but anchoring the space behind her. Camille moved gently to Naomi. Did you print anything? Screenshot anything? Naomi nodded quickly. Yes, I sent it to myself. I was scared, but I couldn't let it disappear. Ella whispered, Thank you. Naomi shook her head. Don't thank me. I should have come sooner. Camille took Naomi to another room to secure the evidence. Marlene followed them, offering comfort. Ella stayed seated, her hands trembling in her lap. Hank left the room briefly, overwhelmed with fury he was trying to contain. That left only Ella and Mason. He moved slowly around her chair, kneeling enough to meet her eyes without towering over her. Ella hadn't realized she was crying until his gaze softened with something deep and unspoken. Ella, he whispered, look at me. She did. Her heartbeat stuttered. This wasn't your fault, he said. It was never your fault. Ella's lips trembled. I thought maybe I had done something wrong, that maybe I was being punished for something I didn't understand. Mason's expression changed, grief and fury and tenderness woven together. You are not being punished, you're being targeted. Ella closed her eyes as tears slipped down her cheeks. Mason didn't touch her, but he leaned closer, his presence warm and steady. Her voice cracked. Why would someone do this to me? To you? Mason's tone dropped lower, richer, filled with something protective and intimate. I don't know yet, but I promise you, when we find out, they will answer for every second of pain they caused you. Ella's breath hitched. You sound so sure. I am, he whispered, because I won't stop until the truth is ours. Ella opened her eyes. Mason was closer now, his face inches from hers. His breath mixed with hers. His eyes held oceans of meaning she wasn't ready to understand. He lifted one hand slowly, careful, deliberate. He didn't touch her face. Instead, he let his thumb brush one tear at the corner of her cheek, barely a whisper of contact, as if her tears were sacred. Ella felt the touch like a spark. Mason's voice was soft but fierce. No one is going to break you. Ella's voice trembled. What if I already am? His gaze deepened. Then let me hold the pieces until you're ready to heal. Ella's entire body stilled. She couldn't breathe. She couldn't speak. She only knew one thing. This moment, this warmth, this man, felt like a turning point she wasn't prepared for. She whispered, Mason. But Camille's voice echoed from down the hall. Ella, Mason, we need to discuss next steps. They stepped apart slowly, reluctantly, though no one had been close enough to notice what almost happened. Mason rose to his feet, offering Ella his hand without pressure. She took it. The warmth of his palm lingered long after he let go. And as they walked toward Camille's office side by side, Ella realized something fragile and terrifying. The distance between their heartbeats was shrinking, and she didn't know how to stop it. The ride back from Camille's law office simmered with a tension Ella couldn't name. The winter air felt sharper, the sky lower, the world somehow heavier now that Naomi's trembling confession had cracked open the truth. Ella sat in the passenger seat of her father's truck, hands resting protectively over her abdomen without realizing it, while Hank drove with his jaw clenched and his knuckles white around the steering wheel. Behind them, Mason's SUV followed at a respectful distance, but Ella felt his presence like a warm pulse in the back of her awareness. It was strange how someone who was physically behind them could feel so steadying, so quietly anchoring, so there. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting the wind hum against the windows. When she opened them again, her mother was turned slightly, watching her from the back seat. You're shaking, Marlene whispered. Ella tried to smile. I'm fine. But she wasn't. Something Naomi had said kept echoing in her mind. You didn't deserve this. No, she hadn't. And yet, She was the one carrying the consequences in her body, in her name, in every wary glance from strangers and every cruel whisper in town. The truck turned into the driveway. Ella's breath caught when she saw a familiar figure standing outside the front porch, arms crossed, expression tight with something that looked like both anger and worry. Rowan Pierce, Mason's PR director. Ella's stomach dropped. She wasn't ready to see him, not after the cold dismissal he'd given her, not after he'd treated her like a problem instead of a person. Hank braked hard enough to jar everyone slightly forward. "What's that vulture doing here?" he growled. Ella swallowed. "I don't know." Mason's SUV pulled up behind them, and the moment Rowan saw him, his stiff posture softened into practiced professionalism. Hank stepped out first, nearly slamming his door in fury. Ella climbed out slowly, the cold air hitting her lungs and grounding her. Rowan shifted uneasily as she approached. "Miss Whitaker," he said, "I came to—" "To what?" Hank interrupted, stepping between Ella and Rowan. "Finish calling her a liar, or have you thought of new ways to insult her?" Rowan winced. "Sir, that was unfortunate. I had incomplete information at the time." Ella's cheeks burned, both from humiliation and anger. "Unfortunate," she repeated softly. "You told me to settle quietly for something I didn't do. You made me feel like my life was a scandal I created." Rowan's expression tightened, but he didn't look away. "I was wrong." "Wrong?" Hank snapped. "About everything." Rowan exhaled slowly. "Yes, and I've come to apologize." Before Ella could respond, Mason stepped forward from behind her, his presence suddenly filling the porch steps with quiet authority. "Rowan," Mason said, voice low. "Inside, now." Rowan nodded stiffly and followed him into the house. Ella hesitated, a swirl of emotions caught in her chest, fear, curiosity, anger, and something else, something that tugged her toward the doorway. She stepped inside. The house felt warmer than usual, though the air crackled with tension. Rowan stood in the middle of the living room with the composure of a man used to negotiating hostile terrain. Mason stood a few feet away, shoulders squared, eyes sharp. "Speak," Mason said. Rowan swallowed, then addressed Hank and Marlene first. "I didn't come on behalf of the Cade Corporation," he began carefully. "I came because Mr. Cade ordered me to correct my mistake." Ella met Mason's gaze, searching for something in his expression. Guilt, anger, regret. Instead, she found resolve. Rowan continued, "When the first rumors surfaced, I reacted with instinct, corporate instinct, protect the client, control the story, assume exploitation." He lowered his gaze. "But I didn't stop to consider the human cost or your innocence." Ella's throat tightened. "You hurt me," she whispered. Rowan looked at her, and for the first time, she saw something like remorse in his eyes. "I know," he said quietly, "and I'm truly sorry." Silence followed, heavy and fragile. Hank looked ready to throw him out anyway, but Ella lifted a hand gently, surprising herself. "Why did you come here?" "To offer my full support," Rowan said. "To do what I should have done from the beginning, advocate for you, not against you." Ella hesitated. Something inside her softened just enough to let the apology in, but before she could speak, Mason stepped closer. "Ella," he said softly, "you don't owe him forgiveness. Not today, not ever if you don't want to." Ella looked up at him. His voice was steady, but there was a flicker of emotion in his eyes she couldn't decipher. Something protective, something warm, something that made her pulse quicken. She whispered, "I know, but I'm tired of holding anger." Mason's expression softened in a way that made her chest tighten. Rowan nodded once, humbled. "I'll work with Camille on media protection and exposure of the hospital cover-up. Anything you need." Hank huffed. Not impressed, but not fighting either. Rowan left shortly after, offering Ella one last quiet apology. When the door closed behind him, the house fell into a long, contemplative silence. Ella exhaled slowly. "That was strange." "Necessary," Mason said gently. She turned to him. He was standing only a few feet away now, close enough that she could see the faint gold flecks in his eyes, close enough that she could feel his presence like a steady warmth. "You told him to apologize," Ella said softly. "Why?" Mason's voice lowered. "Because he hurt you," Ella's breath caught. "And that matters to you?" Mason's jaw flexed, not with anger but with the effort of revealing a truth he typically kept hidden. "Yes." The single word felt like a confession. Ella's heart pounded, loud enough that she wondered if he could hear it. She stepped back slightly, suddenly overwhelmed by the intensity of the moment. Mason didn't pursue. He simply watched her, silently giving her space. Marlene called from the kitchen. "Ella? Sweetheart, are you all right?" Ella swallowed, forcing her voice steady. "I'm fine, Mom." But as Marlene returned to her pots and papers with Camille, Ella found herself drifting toward the back porch, needing air. The late afternoon light stretched across the fields, soft and amber. She wrapped her arms around herself and let the wind carry her breath. A moment later, she felt him behind her. Mason didn't announce himself. He didn't push. He simply stepped out onto the porch and stopped a few feet away, leaning against the railing, watching the horizon with her. "Beautiful view," he murmured. Ella's lips curved faintly. "I've always loved sunsets here. What do you love about them?" Mason asked softly. Ella thought for a moment. "They make the world feel calm, like everything is settling, even when it's not." Mason nodded, eyes tracing the light as it dipped over the hills. "I haven't seen a sunset like this in years." Ella looked at him, surprised. "Why not?" Mason's eyes remained on the horizon. "Because I'm always working, traveling, being watched. It's hard to breathe when your life belongs to everyone else." Ella's chest tightened. "Do you feel that way, like your life isn't yours?" He looked at her then, fully, deeply, with something raw and honest in his gaze. "Sometimes," he said, "but being here, with you, it feels different." Ella's breath caught. The wind stilled around them as if listening. She whispered, "Different how?" Mason stepped closer, not enough to trap her, not enough to overwhelm, just enough that she felt the gravity of him, the warmth radiating from his body, the sincerity in his eyes. He spoke quietly. "Because here, I get to be a person, not a headline, not a brand, not the Dubai Maharaja." His gaze held hers with tender intensity. Just Mason. Ella's heart clenched. She didn't know how to hold the weight of that confession. She didn't know how to answer without revealing too much of her own heart, so she whispered the only truth she could manage. "I'm glad you're here." Mason's breath deepened. "Ella." Her name in his mouth felt like a caress. She stepped back slightly, overwhelmed, her pulse trembling. "I don't know what this is," she confessed softly. "I don't know what's happening between us." Mason didn't move closer, though every line of his body looked like he wanted to. "You don't have to know," he said gently. "Not today, not tomorrow. We can take this one moment at a time." Ella hugged herself tighter. Moments are dangerous. Mason's lips curved softly, not quite a smile. Only when they matter. Ella let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. "And does this matter?" Mason's voice dropped lower, more intimate than anything he'd said before. "More than I expected." Ella's chest fluttered painfully. She looked down at her hands, suddenly shy. "I don't want to be something you feel obligated to protect." Mason stepped closer, slowly, carefully. Their breaths mingled in the cold air. "You are not an obligation," he whispered. "You are someone I want to protect." Ella felt something inside her begin to unravel. Fear, hope, longing, vulnerability, all tangled together. Mason's gaze settled on her face with reverent calm. "Ella," he murmured, "look at me." She did, and the world narrowed to the space between their lips, their hands, their heartbeats. He lifted his hand, stopping just before touching her cheek. Barely an inch of air separated his fingertips from her skin. His restraint was a palpable force, a tenderness more intimate than a kiss. His voice dropped to a whisper. I won't cross a line you don't draw. But if one day you let me, I'll show you what it feels like to be safe with someone." Ella's breath trembled out of her. "Mason." He lowered his hand slowly, giving her space, honoring her silence. Then he whispered, "You're not alone. Not in this. Not in anything that comes next." Ella closed her eyes briefly, overwhelmed, and for the first time she didn't try to fight the warmth unfurling in her chest. She didn't try to suppress the truth that her heart had already realized. She trusted him, and that trust was beginning to feel a lot like falling. When she opened her eyes, the sunset had deepened, painting the porch in shades of gold and rose, and Mason was still there, still watching her, still choosing her, still holding every fragile moment between them like it mattered. The wind howled low against the farmhouse windows, carrying the promise of a winter storm that had begun sweeping across the Tennessee hills. The sky outside was a deep shade of slate, heavy with thick clouds that swallowed the last traces of sunset. Inside the Whitaker home, a warmth lingered from dinner, yet the air bristled with tension none of them could name aloud. Ella stood by the small kitchen window, her fingertips resting lightly on the glass. Her breath fogged a faint circle against it. She felt suspended between fear and tenderness, between the chaos unraveling around her and the quiet ache blooming inside her whenever Mason's voice washed over her memory. She could still feel the warmth of his breath from the porch. The way he'd looked at her as though she was something fragile he didn't dare break, something precious he wanted to protect with his own strength. But tenderness could be dangerous. It could unravel her carefully held resolve. Mason sat at the small kitchen table, reviewing documents Camille had sent over. The dim overhead light threw a golden glow across his features, accentuating the sharp angle of his jaw and the quiet concentration in his eyes. He wasn't wearing a suit jacket anymore, just a charcoal sweater that softened him, made him human in a way she wasn't used to seeing. Hank paced near the hallway, his boots thudding softly against the wood floor, while Marlene whispered to Camille on the phone in the living room. Though the house hummed with activity, Ella's attention orbited one person, one presence, one gravity. Mason looked up, as if sensing her stare. His eyes met hers across the room, and the air changed instantly. The silence between them deepened, stretched, warmed. Ella felt her pulse stumble. He rose slowly, pushing the chair back with a soft scrape. "Are you all right?" he asked, voice low, meant only for her. Ella nodded, though the gesture trembled slightly. "Just thinking." He stopped a few feet away, close enough for the faint scent of cedar and clean winter air to reach her. "About today?" he asked gently. She exhaled. "About everything." His gaze softened. "It's a lot. And you're handling it with a strength most people wouldn't have." Ella's lips curved faintly. "I don't feel strong." "You are," he murmured, "even when you don't see it." Their eyes held. Something warm and dangerous stirred beneath her ribs. A sudden gust rattled the window, pulling Ella from the intensity of his gaze. She folded her arms, trying to steady herself from the inside out. "Mason," she whispered, "why do you care so much?" He inhaled slowly, his breath catching as though her question struck something deep inside him. "Do you really want the truth?" Ella hesitated, then nodded. Mason moved closer, inch by inch, careful and deliberate, until the space separating them was fragile and trembling. "Because," he said softly, "every time I see you hurting, something in me breaks." His voice dropped lower. "And I don't know how to stop caring." Ella's heart pounded, loud enough she feared he could hear it. She looked down, unable to hold the weight of his words. "I don't want to be another problem in your life." He shook his head gently. "You're not a problem. You're someone I'm drawn to." Her breath caught. "Mason." Before he could answer, Hank's voice cut through the moment. "We need to talk," he announced, stepping toward them with crossed arms and narrowed eyes. Ella stiffened. Mason straightened slowly, masking the emotion in his expression with quiet composure. Hank cleared his throat. "There's something we should have discussed earlier. After everything that's happened, I think maybe it's better if Ella keeps some distance, for her protection." Ella blinked in shock. "Dad!" Hank raised a hand. "It's not personal, sweetheart, but you're overwhelmed, she's exhausted, and people are talking. His presence here is only making things harder." A sharp pain pierced Ella's chest. "He's helping us." "Maybe," Hank conceded, "but the town doesn't see it that way." Mason didn't move. His voice emerged steady, controlled. "If you want me to leave for tonight, I will. I only stay because Ella wants me here." Hank's jaw tensed. "I didn't say leave, I said keep distance." Ella felt heat rise beneath her skin. Hurt, confusion, fear of losing the fragile safety Mason had given her. She stepped forward before her father could speak again. "Dad, please, I'm not a child. Mason being here helps me breathe." Hank stared at her, stunned. Marlene drifted into the kitchen, worry etched across her features. "What's going on?" Hank scrubbed a hand over his face. "I'm trying to keep our daughter safe," Mason spoke softly. "And so am I." The room froze. Hank glared. "I don't trust men who say that." Mason didn't flinch. "Then give me the chance to prove it." The two men held each other's gaze, one protective of blood, the other protective of something he hadn't named aloud. The tension thickened until Ella stepped between them. "Enough," she whispered. "Please." Hank backed away slowly. "Fine, but if something happens to her, I'll hold you responsible." Mason nodded once. "Understood." Ella felt a tremor in her hands. Mason reached out with quiet caution, brushing his fingertips against her sleeve rather than her skin. "You're shaking," he murmured. "I'm fine," she whispered. He didn't believe her. He saw through her easily. "Come," Mason said softly. "Let's get some air." They stepped out onto the porch, the wind colder now, sharp enough to sting. Mason stood beside her, not touching, but close enough that she felt sheltered from the icy breeze. Ella's shoulders trembled. "Everything is falling apart." "No," he said quietly. "Everything is changing. There's a difference." She turned to him. "It doesn't feel like a good change." Mason's eyes softened with something warm, something tender. "It will. You just can't see it yet." Ella sighed, her breath forming a small cloud in the air. "Why are you so calm?" "I'm not," he admitted. "I just hide it better." Ella studied him gently. "What scares you?" Mason hesitated, then exhaled a slow, vulnerable breath. "Losing control, failing people I want to protect." Ella's heart clenched. "Who do you want to protect?" His gaze locked onto hers with a gravity that stole her breath. "You." The one word sank into her like a whisper carried by the wind. A distant rumble of thunder echoed across the hills, but Ella barely heard it. Her pulse was too loud, her emotions too intense, her longing too fragile to contain. "Mason," she whispered, "I don't know how to do this." "You don't have to," he murmured. "Just let me stand beside you." Ella felt her resolve melt. She leaned slightly against the railing, overwhelmed by the warmth of his presence. Mason stepped closer, inch by inch, but stopped before their bodies touched. He lifted a hand toward her face, then paused. "May I?" Her breath trembled. "Yes." His fingertips brushed her cheek in the softest, most reverent caress, a touch so gentle it felt like a promise. Ella leaned into it, closing her eyes, breathing in the warmth of his palm, the quiet strength in his stillness. When she opened her eyes, he was already looking at her, deeply, intensely, as if searching for something in her soul. "You're not alone," he whispered. "I know," she murmured. "Not when you're here." A sudden knock at the door startled them both. The porch light flickered. Ella tensed. Mason straightened, protective instinct flashing in his eyes. Marlene cracked the door open. "Ella? Mason? Camille says you need to see something." Ella's pulse spiked. "What is it?" "She found a new document," Marlene said with urgency. "Something important." Mason stepped close to Ella, voice low. "Whatever it is, we face it together." Ella nodded. And as they walked inside, her heart whispered a truth she wasn't ready to say aloud. She needed him more than she had ever needed anyone. The document Camille found arrived in the middle of the storm. Rain slashed against the farmhouse windows like a warning, and the wind pressed hard against the old wooden frame, as if the world itself wanted inside. Marlene's voice shook on the phone as she called everyone into the living room, her face pale beneath the lamp's warm glow. Camille's image appeared on the screen, crisp and unsmiling, her hair pulled back, her eyes sharp with a focus that made Ella's stomach tighten. "I have it," Camille said. Hank leaned forward, bracing his hands on the back of the couch. "What is it?" Camille lifted a folder toward the camera. "An internal incident report, plus audit logs." Naomi pulled that match the hospital's system timeline. "It's not just an unauthorized access. It's a pattern." Ella's breath caught. Mason stood a few feet behind her, still and quiet, his presence a steady shadow against the fear trying to swallow the room. He didn't touch her, but Ella felt him anyway, like gravity. Camille continued. "The hospital denied a breach. This report proves their denial is a lie. It shows a high-level override used on Mr. Cade's preserved genetic material, and it shows the access point, the user ID, and the terminal location." Hank's voice turned low and dangerous. "A name." Camille's gaze didn't waver. "Dr. Vernon Rusk." Marlene gasped softly. Hank's face went rigid. Ella didn't know the man, but the name sounded like cold metal. Like the kind of name that belonged to someone who smiled while doing damage. Camille flipped to another page. "There's more. The report includes a procedure code change entered after Miss Whitaker's visit. A billing code was altered to conceal an additional procedure performed under anesthesia. It was listed as uterine irrigation. The supply log shows an insemination catheter kit was pulled and not recorded properly." Ella's body went cold. Under anesthesia. She heard the words and felt them like a hand around her throat. Her knees weakened, and before she could sway, Mason shifted closer behind her, just enough that she felt his warmth at her back. "Breathe," he murmured, voice low. Ella swallowed hard. So it wasn't an accident. Camille's eyes softened for a fraction of a second. "No, Ella, it wasn't." Hank's voice broke with rage. "That man touched my daughter without consent." Mason's jaw tightened, a quiet fury crossing his face like a shadow. "He won't walk away from this," Mason said, voice controlled but lethal in its calm. Camille nodded. "He won't, because the second part of the evidence is worse. There are communications." Hank's head snapped up. "Between who?" Camille's expression turned colder. "Between Dr. Rusk and a hospital administrator. The messages include pressure, payments, and direct instructions to keep the donor's identity contained." Ella's fingers curled into the fabric of her sweater. "Donor." Camille paused, then said it clearly, with the precision of a blade. "They were using Mr. Cade's preserved material as part of an illegal donor distribution scheme. Celebrity genetics sold under the table, masked through shell documentation, and when your case surfaced publicly, they panicked and tried to bury it." Marlene covered her mouth, tears rising fast. "My baby." Ella felt her mother's grief like a living thing in the room. She turned her head slightly, and Mason was watching her, eyes dark with pain and protection. He looked as though he wished he could take the entire burden off her shoulders and carry it himself. Camille's voice sharpened. "Tomorrow morning, I'm filing an emergency motion. We're also submitting this to the State Attorney General's office and the medical board. Mr. Cade's legal team is coordinating with mine. This becomes criminal." Hank's eyes burned. "Good." Ella's voice trembled. "Will people believe me now?" Camille held her gaze through the screen. "Yes, because evidence doesn't care about gossip." When the call ended, silence filled the house, thick and trembling. Rain hammered the roof. The wind moaned through the trees like a low, restless prayer. Ella stood frozen, her mind struggling to hold the truth without breaking. Marlene wrapped her arms around her, pressing her cheek to Ella's hair. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. I'm so sorry you were hurt." Ella tried to speak, but her throat locked. She could only nod, small and shaken, while her mother held her as if she could keep the world from touching her again. Hank turned away abruptly, shoulders heaving, his hands trembling with a violence he didn't release. And then there was Mason, quiet and still, stepping closer only when Ella's mother loosened her grip. He didn't reach for Ella right away. He waited, eyes searching her face as if asking permission without words. Ella's breath trembled. "Mason." He stepped closer, slowly. "I'm here." Ella's voice cracked. "They did it while I was asleep." Mason's expression tightened with pain, so raw it made him look younger, more human, less like the man tabloids worshipped and feared. "I know," he whispered, "and I'm sorry. I'm sorry my name was used like that. I'm sorry you were treated like something they could take from." Ella shook her head, tears spilling. "It wasn't your fault." "No," he said softly, "but it's my responsibility now." The storm outside raged, but Ella felt something else inside the room, an anchor lowering into place, a steadiness settling beneath the fear. Mason's voice dropped lower. "If you need space, I'll give it. If you need silence, I'll keep it. If you need someone to stand between you and the world—" Ella lifted her eyes, trembling. "You already are." The words escaped her before she could guard them, and for a moment Mason's expression shifted. Surprise, tenderness, something dangerously close to relief. He didn't touch her cheek this time. He didn't pull her into his arms. He simply leaned closer, just enough that Ella felt the warmth of him, the strength of him, the quiet devotion he didn't know how to hide anymore. "Tomorrow will be hard," Mason murmured, "but it will also be the beginning of the end for them." Ella swallowed. "And the beginning of what for me?" Mason's gaze held hers with a gravity that made the room fall away. "The beginning of you getting your life back." The next morning arrived in a cold, grey hush. The storm had passed, leaving wet ground and broken branches, and a sky that looked scrubbed clean. Ella sat at the kitchen table with Marlene, hands wrapped around a mug she barely tasted. Hank paced like a man whose body couldn't hold still while waiting for justice. Mason arrived before sunrise, respectful as always, stopping at the porch, waiting to be invited in. He looked tired, his eyes shadowed, as if he'd spent the night fighting battles in rooms Ella couldn't see. When Ella opened the door, he didn't step in immediately. He looked at her first. "You okay?" he asked softly. Ella nodded, though her voice shook. "I'm trying." Mason's gaze softened. "That's enough for today." They drove into the city with Camille's plan unfolding around them like a map. Hank's truck led. Mason followed behind, not beside, honoring the boundary he'd promised. The world outside the windows looked the same as always. Gas stations, small shops, winter fields. But Ella felt as if she were moving through a different life. At Camille's office, everything happened quickly. Forms, signatures, phone calls. Camille's voice steady as she spoke to prosecutors. Mason's legal team on speakerphone, firm and precise. Naomi under protective counsel, her evidence secured. Then just before noon, Camille walked into the room with a message on her phone and eyes that glinted with controlled triumph. "It's happening," she said. Hank's head snapped up. "What's happening?" Camille's voice sharpened. The State Attorney General accepted the referral. They're coordinating with law enforcement. A warrant is being executed right now. Ella's breath caught. "At the hospital?" Camille nodded. "At the hospital. At Dr. Rusk's office. At administrative terminals. Everything." Marlene clasped her hands together, trembling. "Thank you, Lord." Hank exhaled slowly, something like vindication breaking through his rage. Ella sat very still, heart pounding, as if her body didn't dare believe the world could actually shift in her favor. A short time later, Rowan Pierce arrived with his phone pressed to his ear, his face tight with urgency. He stopped when he saw Ella and nodded respectfully. "The press is gathering," Rowan said. "They've heard raid and celebrity donor fraud, and they're circling." Camille's eyes narrowed. "We control the story, not them." Rowan nodded. "Mr. Cade will speak if you want him to." Ella's chest tightened. The thought of cameras made her stomach turn. Mason stepped closer, voice low. "Only if you want it. I won't put you on a stage without your consent." Ella stared at him. "If you speak, people will listen." "Yes," Mason said, "but your voice matters too." Ella's throat tightened. "I don't know if I can." Marlene reached for her hand. "You can," she whispered. "Not for them. For you." Hank looked at Ella, his eyes wet but fierce. "Tell the truth, baby," he said softly, "and let them choke on it." Ella's breath trembled. She felt fear in her bones, but she also felt something else, a quiet strength that had been growing in her since the day Mason looked at her and saw her, not scandal. She nodded once. "Okay." The press conference wasn't in a glamorous hall. Camille chose the courthouse steps, broad and public, with the seal of the state behind them and law enforcement moving quietly in the background. The air was cold, but the sun was out, pale winter light reflecting off the stone like a promise. Cameras clicked. Reporters shouted names. Ella's knees trembled beneath her coat. Mason stood beside her, slightly angled, not blocking her, not claiming her, but positioned like a shield. Camille spoke first, concise and sharp, confirming the filing, the evidence, the criminal investigation, and the hospital's false denial. Then Mason stepped forward. The noise softened, like the world leaned in. He didn't smile. He didn't perform. His voice was calm, steady, and heavy with truth. "My name has been used as a weapon," he said, "and a young woman has been treated like collateral damage. That ends today." Reporters shouted questions, but Mason didn't flinch. "Ella Whitaker did not ask for attention," Mason continued. "She did not ask for money. She asked for the truth, and she deserves it." Ella's throat tightened, emotion rising like a tide. She stared at his profile as he spoke, the way he held himself with controlled power, the way his words wrapped around her dignity like a cloak. Then Mason stepped back, turning slightly toward her. He didn't push her forward. He simply made space. Ella's heart pounded as she stepped to the microphone. The camera flashes made her blink. Her hands shook, and then she heard Mason's voice, low and close, meant only for her. "Breathe," he murmured. "You're safe." Ella inhaled. She lifted her chin and looked into the crowd. "My name is Ella Whitaker," she said, voice trembling but clear. "I'm not a headline, I'm not a rumor, I'm not a joke for strangers to talk about." Her voice strengthened with each word. "I was hurt without consent. My medical records were manipulated. My body was treated like something people could use." She swallowed, tears burning, but she kept going. "And for weeks, people looked at me like I was guilty." Her gaze swept the crowd, and she saw faces she recognized from town, standing behind the press line, watching with uncomfortable silence. "I want my life back," Ella said. "I want my name back, and I want every person who did this to answer for it." She stepped back, trembling. Mason's hand lifted, stopping just shy of her elbow, as if he wanted to steady her but refused to claim her without permission. Ella leaned slightly toward him anyway, and that small motion spoke louder than 1,000 words. The press conference ended quickly after that. Camille ushered them inside before the reporters could swarm. In the quiet hallway beyond the courthouse doors, Ella's legs finally weakened. She pressed her hand to her chest, breathing hard. Mason stepped closer, voice soft. "You were incredible." Ella shook her head, tears spilling. "I was terrified." "And you did it anyway," Mason murmured. "That's what courage is." Ella looked up at him, the fluorescent hallway light reflecting in his eyes. "Do you think they'll stop now?" Mason's expression turned fierce. "They're being arrested. They don't get to touch you anymore." Camille approached with her phone in hand, her lips pressed into a satisfied line. "Dr. Rusk is in custody," she said. "So is the administrator who authorized the override. More names are coming. The hospital's council is requesting settlement talks, but criminal charges are proceeding regardless." Hank let out a sound that was half relief, half grief. Marlene covered her mouth and cried softly. Ella stood very still, the words sinking in like warm water over bruises. In custody. It was real. The world hadn't fixed everything, but it had finally tilted toward justice. Later that evening, back at the farmhouse, the air felt different. The sky was clear, stars bright and sharp above the fields. The security SUV remained at the property line, but it felt less like a necessity and more like a closing chapter. Ella stood on the porch alone for a moment, breathing in the cold night air. The silence was not suffocating tonight. It was peaceful. Footsteps creaked behind her. Mason stepped onto the porch slowly, careful as always, as if he respected even the quiet. "You should be resting," Ella whispered. Mason's voice was low. "I couldn't rest until I saw you." Ella's chest tightened. "Today was overwhelming." Mason moved closer, stopping a respectful distance away. "I watched you take your name back," he said softly. "I watched you stand in front of the world and refuse to be broken." Ella swallowed, emotion rising. "I couldn't have done it without you." Mason's eyes softened. "You did it with you." Ella shook her head slowly. "I don't know what happens now." Mason's jaw tightened, not with anger, but with the effort of revealing something honest. "Now you heal. Now you choose what you want." Ella looked at him, heart trembling. "And what do you want?" Mason's breath deepened. He stepped closer, slow and careful, as if approaching something sacred. "I want to be in your life," he said quietly. "Not because of scandal, not because of responsibility, because somewhere between the fear and the fight, you became someone I can't imagine walking away from." Ella's breath caught. "Mason, I know the difference between protection and possession," he continued, voice rough with feeling. "I don't want to own you. I want to stand beside you. I want to build something that doesn't steal you from who you are." Ella's eyes burned. "I'm just a farm girl." Mason's gaze held hers, steady and tender. "You are the strongest woman I've ever met." Ella's lips trembled. "I'm scared of the world you live in." Mason nodded once. "Then I won't force you into it. I'll bring my world to its knees if it tries to hurt you, but I won't drag you where you don't want to go." Ella stared at him, her heart pounding like a prayer. Mason's hand lifted slowly, stopping just short of hers. "May I?" he whispered. Ella nodded. His fingers slid into hers, warm and steady, the contact sending a soft tremor through her entire body. He didn't squeeze too hard. He didn't pull. He simply held, as if his touch was a promise he would honor with his life. Ella whispered, "I don't know how to love someone like you." Mason's eyes softened with something that looked like relief and longing. "Then don't love a headline," he murmured. "Love Mason." Ella's breath trembled, and she stepped closer, closing the last fragile space between them. Mason didn't rush. He waited, still, restrained, his forehead almost touching hers. Ella whispered, "I'm still scared." Mason's voice was a hush against her breath. "Then I'll be gentle." And when Ella finally lifted her face, Mason met her halfway, his lips brushing hers in a kiss that felt like warmth after winter. Soft, reverent, unhurried. No hunger, no claim, just tenderness and a quiet promise that she was safe. When they parted, Ella's eyes were wet. Mason rested his forehead lightly against hers. "You're not alone," he whispered. Ella's voice broke with truth. "I know." Behind them, the farmhouse glowed with warm light, where Marlene and Hank moved quietly inside, finally breathing after weeks of fear. Ahead of them, the fields lay open under starlight, wide and honest. Ella squeezed Mason's hand, feeling the steady beat of his pulse against her fingers. For the first time since her life shattered, the future didn't look like a threat. It looked like a beginning. The first snow of December fell in slow, quiet flakes, drifting down over the Whitaker fields as if the sky itself had learned how to be gentle. Ella stood at the kitchen window of the farmhouse. The same farmhouse, the same worn wood floors, the same porch that had once held the weight of fear and fragile hope. But now the air inside smelled like cinnamon and warm bread, like laughter that had become a daily rhythm, like a home that no longer flinched at every passing car. Outside, the old barn had been restored, painted a clean deep red, its roof newly fixed. A wind chime hung from the porch beam, singing softly when the breeze moved through it. The land looked the way it always had, honest, open, stubbornly beautiful, but everything else had changed. Ella touched the small scar near her wrist where anxiety once lived like a pulse. It was faint now, almost invisible, but she remembered. She always remembered. Behind her, the sound of running feet thudded across the hallway. "Mom!" a small voice called out, bright and impatient. "He's here!" Ella smiled before she even turned. That voice, wide-eyed, fearless, could pull sunshine into any room. "Who's here, Wren?" she asked, turning toward the entryway. A girl of 9 barreled into the kitchen with a swirl of honey-blonde curls and a sweater that still held a smear of flour from helping Marlene bake cookies. Her cheeks were flushed from excitement, her eyes a startling shade between blue and green that made Ella's heart ache every time she looked at her. Wren Cade Whitaker had Mason's intensity and Ella's softness all tangled together. Wren didn't stop running until she reached Ella, grabbing her hand and tugging. "Dad's truck is turning in." Ella laughed softly. "Honey, you're going to pull my arm off." "I can't wait," Wren squealed, bouncing on her toes. "He promised he'd be home early." "And he never gets home early." Ella's chest tightened with a warmth that never stopped surprising her. "He tried," she murmured. "He always tries." The front door opened, letting in a rush of cold air and the heavy scent of winter. Boots hit the mat with familiar weight. Then Mason's voice filled the house, deep and warm, carrying a softness that wasn't for the world. It was for her. It was for them. "I'm home," he called. Wren screamed with joy and ran toward him like a comet. Ella didn't have to see him to know the moment he entered. The house always felt different when Mason Cade stepped inside. Not because of money, not because of power, but because his presence had become the steady heartbeat under everything they'd built. And still, even after 10 years, her body reacted the same way it had that first time, like her spirit recognized him before her mind could form a thought. Mason appeared in the hallway with snowflakes clinging to his dark coat, his hair slightly wind-tossed, his shoulders broader now, carrying the quiet weight of years. His eyes found Ella instantly, the same way they always did, as if the world blurred until she was the only thing clear. Wren threw herself into his arms, and Mason caught her easily, lifting her up with a laugh that still sounded like a rare gift. "There's my favorite girl," he murmured, kissing her temple. Wren scowled playfully. "Mom is your favorite girl." Mason's gaze lifted over his daughter's head to Ella. The look he gave her was slow, steady, full of a tenderness that never faded. "Your mum is my favorite everything," he said quietly. Ella's throat tightened, nostalgia rising like a tide. 10 years. 10 years since the day her world cracked open and she thought she would never breathe again. 10 years since the courthouse steps, since her trembling voice at the microphone, since the truth finally forced the world to listen. 10 years since Mason's hands, careful, respectful, had held hers like a promise. And somehow, love had survived. Not the easy kind of love, the kind you read about and forget, the kind that shines for a moment and fades when life gets hard. Their love had survived the hard parts, because it was born in them. Mason lowered Wren, letting her run off toward the living room where Marlene's laughter floated faintly. Then he stepped toward Ella, stopping just close enough for her to smell the cold on him, the faint trace of his cologne, the warmth beneath the winter. "You're freezing," Ella whispered. Mason's eyes softened. "I'm fine." Ella tilted her head slightly, studying him the way she still did, as if every day she found new reasons to love him. "You say that every time." Mason's mouth curved with a restrained smile. "Because you always look at me like you're about to take care of me." "I am," Ella said softly. Mason reached for her hands, his fingers warm, familiar, steady. He rubbed his thumb over her knuckles, a gesture that had become their silent language, comfort, devotion, home. "I missed you," he murmured. Ella's breath trembled out. You were gone 2 days. Mason's gaze deepened with emotion. That's enough. Ella smiled, and before she could stop herself, she stepped into him. Mason didn't hesitate. He wrapped his arms around her, pulling her close, his chin resting lightly against her hair. The embrace wasn't urgent. It was anchored. It was the kind of embrace you earn after years of choosing each other. You smell like snow, Ella whispered. Mason's voice was low. You smell like home. The word sank into her chest like warmth. Home. For so long, Ella had thought home was a place, land, porch, fields, the safety of her parents' voices in the kitchen. But home had become something more. Home was the way Mason looked at her when he thought no one was watching. Home was the way he listened when she spoke. Home was the way he never once treated her like a scandal again, not even in the darkest moments when the world tried. They stayed like that for a moment, quiet in the kitchen, while the snow fell outside. Then Marlene's voice rang out from the living room. Mason, if you're not too important to help us, we need you to hang the lights. Mason chuckled into Ella's hair. Your mother has never respected my title. Ella smiled softly. Good. Mason pulled back slightly, lifting her chin with a gentle touch. His eyes searched her face, the way they always did, as if he still worried he might lose her to fear, to pain, to the past. You okay? He asked. Ella nodded. I'm peaceful. Mason's gaze softened. You deserve that. As they walked into the living room, the farmhouse glowed with holiday warmth. Hank sat in his favorite chair near the fireplace, older now, his hair silver at the temples, but his eyes still sharp. He held a mug of coffee and pretended not to care, but when Mason stepped into the room, Hank's gaze softened in the smallest way. Mason approached him with quiet respect. Mr. Whitaker, Hank grunted. Cade. Then he paused, clearing his throat like the words cost him. You drive safe? Mason nodded. Always. Hank stared at him a moment longer than necessary, then muttered, Good. Ella watched that exchange with a tenderness that made her chest ache. Hank had resisted Mason at first, not because he hated him, because he feared him, feared the world Mason belonged to, feared the way the world could swallow a girl like Ella whole. But Mason had earned Hank's trust the only way it could be earned, with time, with consistency, with quiet devotion, with years of showing up. For birthdays, for storms, for school plays, for the nights Ella woke trembling from nightmares, and Mason held her without asking questions, his arms steady until the shaking stopped. For the hearings and court dates and appeals, for the day the settlement fund was signed into law, because that was what changed society. The scandal that had once tried to destroy Ella became the spark that forced the state to respond. The Whitaker Consent Act, reporters had called it later, passed after public outrage, strengthened oversight, requiring explicit, documented consent for fertility and reproductive procedures, increasing penalties for medical fraud, establishing a victims' advocacy office. It wasn't perfect. Nothing ever was. But it was something. And in small towns and big cities alike, women began saying the same phrase in interviews, in clinics, in waiting rooms. It won't happen to me, not like it happened to Ella. Ella never wanted to be a symbol, but she became one anyway. Not because she asked for it, because she survived it, and because she chose again and again to stand. The guilty paid a price too. Dr. Vernon Rusk lost his license before the trial even began. The criminal case unfolded like a slow, brutal unraveling. More names, more victims, more evidence. The administrator who helped bury the logs took a plea deal and served time, permanently barred from healthcare management. Rusk tried to fight it, tried to blame system failures and miscommunication, but the truth was sharper than his excuses. And when the verdict came, it felt like the world exhaled, not because prison fixed what was done, but because it finally acknowledged what had been stolen. Still, not everyone escaped unscathed. Naomi, the young nurse who came forward, paid a price the world didn't often honor. She lost her job. She faced threats. She moved away for a while. She had to rebuild her life from scratch, haunted by what she'd witnessed, but she didn't disappear. Years later, Naomi stood at a podium beside Ella and accepted an award for whistleblower advocacy, her eyes tearful and proud. "I did the right thing," Naomi had said, voice trembling, even when it hurt, and Ella had squeezed her hand, whispering, "You saved me." Now, in the warm glow of the living room, Wren climbed onto Hank's lap, chattering about school and Christmas cookies. Hank grumbled, pretending annoyance, but his arms tightened around her anyway. Mason stood behind Ella, his hand resting gently at her waist, grounding her. The touch was quiet and familiar, as if he was reminding her without words that he was still here, that he always would be. Ella turned her head slightly. "Do you ever think about it?" she asked softly. "The beginning?" Mason's gaze lowered to her, tender and serious. "Every day." Ella's throat tightened. "Does it still hurt?" Mason's jaw tightened briefly. "It makes me angry," he admitted. "Not at you, never at you, at what they did." His voice softened. "But it also reminds me what we built after." Ella leaned her head against his shoulder. "Sometimes I still feel scared," she whispered, "like the world could take everything again." Mason's hand tightened at her waist, a warm, steady pressure. "Then we'll hold each other tighter," he murmured. "That's how we survived the first time." Ella's eyes burned with emotion. "And the baby?" Mason's expression softened instantly. "Wren," he murmured, looking at their daughter with a love so deep it made Ella's chest ache. Ella swallowed hard. She came from pain. Mason turned Ella's face toward him gently. His eyes held hers, steady and reverent. "She came from you," he said quietly, "and you are not pain." Ella's breath trembled out. Mason leaned in and kissed her forehead, slow, gentle, unhurried. The kiss wasn't passion. It was devotion. It was the kind of kiss that said, "I'm still choosing you." Ella closed her eyes, letting the warmth settle into her bones. Outside, snow continued to fall, softening the world. Inside, laughter rose around them, filling the farmhouse with the kind of joy Ella once believed she would never have again. Years ago, she had been the girl everyone whispered about. Now she was a woman who had reclaimed her name. A mother, a daughter, a wife, though Mason still rarely used the word as if it wasn't enough to hold what she meant to him. And as the lights twinkled on the tree and Wren's laughter rang out again, Ella realized something with a rush of quiet certainty. Love had resisted time because it was never built on perfection. It was built on choice, on respect, on the sacred patience of a man who never tried to own her, only to stand beside her, and on the courage of a woman who refused to be erased. Mason's voice brushed her ear, soft as snowfall. "Come dance with me." Ella blinked. "Here." Mason's eyes warmed. "Right here." He reached for her hand, and Ella let him lead her to the small open space between the couch and the Christmas tree. There was no music, only the crackle of the fire and the distant wind outside. But Mason swayed with her anyway, slow and careful, holding her as if she were the most precious thing he'd ever been trusted with. Ella rested her cheek against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. 10 years ago, that heartbeat had been a stranger's. Now it was the rhythm of her life. Ella whispered, barely audible, "We made it." Mason's arms tightened around her, and his voice was thick with emotion. "We did," he murmured, "and I'll keep making it with you, every year, every storm, every sunrise." Ella lifted her face, her eyes shining. Mason kissed her then, softly, reverently, like the beginning of something that never truly ended. And while snow fell outside and the world kept turning, the farmhouse held its warmth, its peace, its love. A love that had survived the headlines, a love that had outlasted the fear, a love that had turned pain into legacy. And in the quiet, nostalgic glow of that winter night, Ella understood the most unforgettable truth of all. Some stories don't end. They become a home. Sometimes the storms that break us are the same ones that teach us how to rebuild. Ella's story reminds us that even when life takes everything we thought was ours, dignity, love, and truth can rise from the ashes stronger than before. She found courage not in perfection, but in persistence, in standing tall after being broken, in daring to love again when fear told her not to. And Mason, he showed us that love is not control or rescue or pride. Love is presence. It's staying. It's listening. It's choosing someone every single day, even when the world tries to write their story for them. If this story touched your heart tonight, I'd love to know. What did you feel as you listened? Did Ella's strength or Mason's devotion remind you of something or someone in your own life? Tell me in the comments. And if you made it all the way here, write the word home in the comments below, because after everything, that's what they built together. A home not made of walls, but of trust. If you wish to help the team that brings these stories to life, you can send us super thanks on YouTube with whatever amount feels right for you. It truly helps us keep creating more heartfelt tales like this one. And if that's not possible, simply share this story with a friend or loved one. That's another beautiful way to help it reach someone who might need hope tonight. Thank you for being here, for feeling every emotion with us, and for keeping romance, the real, healing kind, alive. Stay until the end and check out the other stories I've left for you in the cards. Each one carries its own heartbeat, waiting for you to listen.